I never saw it coming. The betrayal was right under my nose, hidden behind a facade of love and trust. For years, I thought I had it all: a stable career, a devoted wife, a future full of promise. But it was all a lie. She played me, made a fool out of me, and when I discovered the truth, it shattered everything. Every moment of happiness was a cruel joke. Now, the only thing left is the plan I've crafted. A plan that will make her regret ever crossing me. This is my story. This is my revenge. I felt my knee twist in a strange way, and then I heard a sharp sound. I instantly knew that whatever had happened was serious. The pain that shot through my body was intense. It felt so strange lying there on the grass, in a stadium filled with 60,000 people, and it was almost completely quiet. As I lay there hurting, my life started to flash before my eyes. My name is Jason Saunders, and I found it odd that I had become a professional football player. Sure, I had mostly been a backup quarterback in the NFL, but I still loved the game. Yes, there were tough moments when big players hit hard, and it wasn't enjoyable at all. It was especially unfortunate that a linebacker had knocked me down just when I was in a bad position. Now it seemed likely that my football days were over. It was such a pointless injury. I had been brought in just to help run down the clock. There were less than 2 minutes left in the game, and we were winning 38-17. It was 2nd and 4 when I handed off the ball to Tony Jacobs, a backup running back. He got hit right away, and the ball came loose. I picked it up on the second bounce and tried to run. That's when the linebacker came crashing into my leg. As I lay there hurting, my thoughts started to drift. They weren't just about how my football career might be ending. Even in so much pain, the thought that my wife had left me for someone else hurt even more. I rocked slightly as the pain made me sweat and feel sick. The team doctor and trainers seemed to be taking a long time figuring out what to do. To distract myself from the pain, I thought back over the years. Anyone reading my thoughts might be confused. I had been a backup quarterback for most of my football life, and I thought it was a great role. You see, I was happy playing a supporting role. First, I knew what I was capable of. I was just an average player. I wasn't the ideal height for a quarterback and only had moderate arm strength. Plus, my body wasn't built to handle constant hits. But the money I got for doing relatively little work was quite good. When you are a backup quarterback, no one expects much from you. People usually think you will mess up, so they aren't too upset if you do. But if you do well, they are impressed. Of course, you work hard during the season and get paid a lot compared to many jobs. I will mention one more thing about my skills. Even though I was just average, I could shine when I got a chance to play. I also seemed to perform better under pressure. The bigger the game, the better I played. What I earned was small compared to starting quarterbacks, but I was content with my pay because it was more than most people make in a year. I just shake my head when I hear about players refusing big contracts worth millions. Looking back on my football journey, it's funny because being a pro player was never my dream. I didn't want to play football, much less turn it into a job. Over the years, I've met many who wanted to reach the NFL, and none got close. I kind of stumbled into it and kept hoping to stretch my time in the game for one more year. Each year felt like a tightrope walk, knowing that eventually I'd need to find a real job. While lying on the field in Philadelphia, I realized my football career had been much luckier than my romantic life. This was either my 7th or 8th year in the NFL, and the pain made it hard to think clearly. It struck me as odd that both my love life and my football career seemed to be falling apart at the same time. "Jason, do you feel pain anywhere besides your left knee?" the team trainer asked. I shook my head, trying to bear the discomfort. "All right, I'll help you turn onto your back. Just stay still and I'll support your knee." The doctor looked me over and then called for the cart. As I was taken off the field, the fans started to cheer. If this was my last game, at least those cheers would be a nice memory. I gave a thumbs up and the crowd cheered even louder. The noise faded as we entered the tunnel, and I realized I would become a distant thought for the fans. Later, I was taken to the hospital where they told me I had torn my ACL. They planned to operate in the morning. At 30 years old, I felt certain my NFL days were over. Lying in bed, I felt down even though I knew I shouldn't complain. I had played longer than most NFL players, whose careers average less than 3 years. I understood why teams made changes. If you're just an average player, it's cheaper to bring in a fresh recruit from college after a couple of years. That's why I never knew from one year to the next if a team would keep me or not. Yet somehow, I made it into the NFL and lasted until now. Meanwhile, my love life felt like a series of disasters. My path to the NFL started because I talked too much. It makes me curious about how my life might have gone if I had kept quiet that day. I didn't play many organized sports as a kid, and I had never played football until I reached high school. Even when I began as a freshman, I wasn't interested in joining the high school football team. But then I spoke up at the wrong time. I was a small, scrawny kid, just 5'6" and 150 pounds, with no football skills at all. But I had foolishly said too much, and my pride wouldn't let me step back. We had been joking about the football team, who were the stars at our high school, Harrison High. I got caught up in the talk and casually said that I didn't think they were all that strong. Before I could explain that I thought soccer players were tougher, everyone started laughing at me. This made me mad, and before I knew it, they had pushed me into signing up for the football team. Harrison High was one of the few success stories in school integration. About 40 years ago, the school board closed an old high school that had a mostly black student body. The students were moved to Harrison, which was mostly white at the time. There were a lot of tensions during that first year, but the principal back then, Mr. Winters, who was black, managed to keep things calm. Today, the school is about 45% white, 35% black, and 20% Hispanic. And surprisingly, everyone mostly gets along. The integration helped Harrison become strong in sports. We not only had a good football team, but also great basketball, soccer, tennis, and golf teams. Knowing Harrison High's sports traditions, I felt my time on the football team would be short, but at least I could hold my head high, knowing I hadn't backed down. The coaches started us with something called suicides. Suicides meant running fast for 20 yards, then walking back to the start. Then we ran fast for 30 yards and walked back, then 40 yards, and finally 50. When we finished that, we started over. It was a way to see who could keep up. There were 273 of us trying out. It felt chaotic. After my second round of suicides, I got sick. But I wasn't too embarrassed because many other guys did too. The rest of that first day was filled with running, tackling, and blocking, ending with a 1-mile run. That was the only part where I felt good, finishing in the top third. Still, my body hurt by the end of the day. I thought about quitting, but my friends had been teasing me through practice, so there was no way I could give up. By the start of the second day, the number of students trying out had dropped to 162. The coaches only planned to keep 90 on the team. When the second day was a lot like the first, I wanted to quit even more. But my friends were still cheering me on, so I pushed through. Somehow, I made it through the first week. By the time the weekend arrived, I was so sore that walking was hard. Even in the second week of practice, I wished I could find a way to quit while still keeping my pride. Day after day, I waited for that chance, but it never came. It was during this week that I noticed a bit of hope. The coaches were trying to see if any new players were worth keeping. The players who had been on the team last year were set apart from the new ones, including me. As the next practice went on, I realized I didn't seem to have much to offer. With my smaller size and slower speed, I knew I couldn't play most positions like lineman or running back. Kicking the football wasn't my strong suit either. As I was told I couldn't play one position after another, it felt like this ordeal might soon end. If I couldn't help the team, surely they would let me go. If that happened, I could go back to my friends and say that football players weren't that tough. I would tell them I didn't make the team because I wasn't big or fast enough. But that didn't happen. When I went to see the quarterback coach, he looked at my hands and smiled. I didn't understand why, as I had always had larger hands. Then he asked me to throw the football a few times. I threw it 45 yards down the field, and his smile grew. When we began throwing to receivers, I found I was accurate too. My hopes of being cut from the team disappeared that day. Over the next 2 weeks, the coaches decided to keep me around as a possible quarterback. I didn't see their reasoning at all. I was only about 5'7" and weighed around 160 pounds. Still, day after day, I trained as a quarterback. When the final cuts were made, I was still on the team. I was frustrated because I didn't want to play football, but at least my friends stopped teasing me. When my freshman season began, our starting quarterback was Danny Sullivan, with Occam Nelson and Brian Stoddard as the backups. Once the season started, the practices changed. The coaches were no longer pushing us to our limits. They focused more on timing and skills. As the season went on, I had to admit that being a backup quarterback wasn't bad. I practiced with the third-team offense and wore a red jersey that meant no one was supposed to hit me. However, in high school, that rule wasn't always followed. More than once, a linebacker or lineman would knock me down. The coaches would scold the offending player, but they always smiled when I lined up again. One interesting thing about my first season was that only 10 freshmen tried out for the team, and I was the only one who made it. I would find out later that the coaches noticed skills in me that I didn't know I had. They planned to help me grow so that I would be the starting quarterback by my senior year. But I only learned about their plans years later. During my first season, I mostly sat on the bench. To be honest, I didn't mind that at all. I didn't have any pressure, and I didn't have to worry about getting hurt. The coaches didn't even ask me to join the special teams. One of the perks of being on the football team was that it was supposed to help me meet girls. In a high school where sports were so important, many girls liked athletes. At least that's how it was supposed to be. But since I was just a short, skinny freshman, I was at the very bottom of the athlete hierarchy. Plus, I was nervous around girls, which made things even harder. I didn't really get to enjoy being an athlete. By the end of the year, most people didn't even know I played football. If they didn't believe me, I could show them the team picture from the yearbook. Not having a girlfriend didn't bother me much. My friends didn't have girlfriends either. But then the homecoming dance came up. Our team captain said that every football player needed to come to the dance in a sports coat, tie, and with a date. I had the coat and tie, but I didn't know who to ask for a date. The only girl I felt comfortable enough to approach was Melinda Samuels, the preacher's daughter. Melinda wasn't unattractive, but she wasn't what you would call pretty either. She wore plain clothes and had glasses and braces. Still, in my mind, it was either her or no one. It took me 3 days to find the courage to ask her. I was happy when she quickly said yes. The dance itself was nothing special, except that Melinda looked lovely. She traded her usual clothes for a nice dress that complemented her figure, and she left her glasses at home, saying she only needed them for reading. After the dance, we went on a couple of dates, but they didn't last long. However, it gave me the confidence to ask other girls out. Meanwhile, Melinda changed after the homecoming dance and caught the attention of many other guys, and she started dating a lot. During the summer before my sophomore year, I decided I wouldn't play football next season. But I probably would have stuck to that if the coach hadn't stopped me in the hallway to make sure I would be there for the first practice. By the time the season started, I became the third-string quarterback. Danny had graduated and received an academic scholarship to play football at Duke. I should mention that Danny was both very smart and a talented athlete. As I said, I enjoyed sitting on the bench and watching the game up close. The coaches felt I should take on a more active role, so they made me the placeholder for our kicker, Rollo Rodriguez. Rollo was quite full of himself, believing he was better than everyone else. Being a placeholder is not hard. I simply take the snap from the center, set the ball down with my finger on top, and move my other hand out of the way. Rollo thought it was funny to kick high during practice, trying to catch my hand. I wanted to confront him, but he could kick a field goal from 50 yards away. I figured the coaches wouldn't like it if I got into trouble over him. Eventually, Rollo played for Ohio State and even had a brief time with the Denver Broncos, but he still acted like a jerk. The state championship game changed my football career. We were losing to Patterson High 27-24 with less than 2 minutes left. Danny Sullivan moved our team to Patterson's 25-yard line, but we hit a roadblock. With only 11 seconds left, the coach sent Rollo to try a field goal to tie the game. We hoped we would go into overtime, but that wasn't how things went. The snap was perfect, and I managed to place the ball down well. But then Rollo slipped on some uneven turf, and his kick was blocked. The ball bounced back towards me, and I had to run fast. It felt like they almost caught me 3 times, but I managed to escape. Then I spotted Barry Blakely open in the end zone, so I threw him a pass just as time ran out. Instead of going to overtime, we won the game 30-27. Our linemen were so excited that I thought they were going to lift me off the ground. The whole team gathered at Julio's Pizza Kitchen to celebrate. Due to the crowd, they had to open up a special room in the back for us. I was enjoying the night when Jimmy Washington walked in. Jimmy was a wide receiver a year ahead of me, and that night, he had Melinda with him. It was clear they had been drinking. It was normal for Jimmy to be loud, but seeing Melinda like that was surprising. "Hey, white bread," Jimmy said with a grin. "You may have won the game, but I got your girl." I should mention that Jimmy and I didn't get along well. I think it was because I once nicknamed him Stone Hands. Jimmy was an incredible athlete. He ran faster than anyone else on our team and was also great at basketball, but as a wide receiver, he often struggled to catch the ball. He didn't have the gentle touch that a good receiver should have. Looking back, I shouldn't have called him Stone Hands, but I got frustrated when he dropped the fourth pass I threw to him in practice. Over time, I learned that Jimmy held on to grudges. He could be quite vengeful, and I would discover just how difficult he could be. I found Jimmy's comments amusing. Once Melinda got her braces off, she looked really good. I had only taken her to one dance and a few dates, but if everyone thought she was my girlfriend, it might help my reputation. Plus, I wanted to tease Jimmy a little, which wasn't the smartest idea. "First off, I don't like being called plain," I said, trying to be funny. "I'm more like whole grain, and Melinda isn't my girlfriend, but I wouldn't need to do anything tricky for her to like me." Jimmy pushed me back down when I tried to stand up and walk away. "Forget you! She's my date!" "Come on, don't be foolish," I said with a grin. "Melinda has never been my girlfriend. Are you calling me foolish?" Jimmy pushed me again. By then, everyone in the pizza shop was watching us. I was really annoyed with Jimmy for making a scene, but I didn't want to escalate things since he was much bigger than me. Still, I felt like I couldn't just back down, so I tried to make a joke, which wasn't the best idea. "Jimmy, you're so silly. You can't even walk and chew gum at the—" I saw one of the big guys, Joey Weaver, holding Jimmy's arm tightly. Joey was called Tuba because he played the tuba in middle school, and he was very sensitive about his weight. He weighed about 300 pounds. After Jimmy shouted, I watched Tuba do something incredible. He lifted Jimmy off the ground with one hand. "I'm pretty sure I misheard you," Tuba said calmly. "Didn't you say Tuba?" Jimmy's eyes went wide with fear. He quickly nodded his head. Yeah, that's right, Tuba." "I thought so," Tuba said as he set Jimmy down. "And leave my quarterback alone. We big guys don't like it when someone picks on our quarterback. Got it?" "Yeah, okay," Jimmy said, looking apprehensive as he turned and walked away. Tuba looked at me, chuckled, and encouraged me to find someone my own size. Jimmy was tall and weighed around 195 pounds. I always liked Tuba, and we remained friends long after high school. Jimmy left so fast that he forgot to take Melinda with him. Wanting to be a nice guy, I decided to give her a ride home. First, I took her to the Sundowner Diner and got her a cup of coffee. After we sat down, Melinda started to argue with me, which made me frustrated. I felt it was best to give her some space. Once outside the diner, I called her father to let him know where to find her. After that, Melinda didn't speak to me for the rest of the year, but that didn't bother me. By my junior year, I had grown taller. I was now 6 feet 2 inches, weighed 195 pounds, and had become stronger and a bit quicker. Still, I was considered slow compared to some of my team. The downside of his play style was that it made our offense less flexible. We also lacked strong running backs and a solid offensive line, with Tuba being the only reliable player at left tackle. We had a tough season but ended with a 7-2 record, which allowed us to enter the playoffs, though we had a hard time advancing. We reached the semifinals and played against St. John's, where we did surprisingly well, winning 42-10. Akem was fantastic that game, scoring 4 touchdowns and throwing for 2 more. I even caught one of those touchdown passes. In the finals, we faced the best team in the state, Clinton High, who were favored to win by 2 touchdowns. Many expected them to overpower us, especially on defense. They scored easily, but our team responded again and again thanks to Akem's effort. With less than 2 minutes left, Clinton scored and took a 42-38 lead. We got the ball back, and Akem ran for 15 yards on the first 2 plays. Unfortunately, on the 3rd play, he got hurt and had to leave the game. That's when I realized I could handle pressure. I went onto the field and started leading our team down the field, ready to give it my all. Clinton was ready to play against Akem, and they didn't know what to do with me. We were finally on Clinton's 4-yard line with just 5 seconds left. I realized we had time for only one final play. The coach put 3 wide receivers on one side of the field. Jimmy moved just before the snap, as planned. The defender who should have covered him missed the assignment. I threw a great. Tabor was about 5'7" and 210 pounds of pure muscle. He could run fast, and because of his low build, he was hard to stop. We were good friends until things changed. With our improved offensive line and stronger defense, Harrison became a powerful team again. We had a smooth run through the regular season and made it to the finals easily. Most of our success was on the ground. Other teams found it hard to stop Tabor, and when they did manage to slow him down, I could start passing, putting more pressure on their defense. My life was going well until 2 weeks before the state finals. I thought I had to work one Friday night at my part-time job, but it turned out they accidentally scheduled 2 of us. So I went home and changed, then I decided to visit Gina. When I arrived, I saw Tabor's car in her driveway. When I looked inside, I couldn't believe what I saw. Gina and Tabor were sharing a moment together in the front seat. Feeling a wave of emotion, I opened the driver's side door and confronted Tabor, asking, "What's going on?" Gina looked surprised, and Tabor quickly stood up, looking shocked. "Jason, I'm really sorry," Tabor said right away. "We just didn't know how to tell you." "I'm sorry, Jason," Gina added. "We just developed feelings for each other." Feeling hurt and betrayed, I muttered, "Forget both of you," and walked back to my car. Tabor tried to grab my arm, but I pulled it away. "Stay away from me, Tabor. You are a traitor. And Gina, you are not someone I can trust." It seemed I was the last one to hear about my challenges in my personal life. I discovered that Jimmy had convinced Gina I was being unfaithful. She never discussed it with me. Instead, she chose to believe Jimmy. Everyone on the team had heard about the situation between Tabor and me, and it became quite public at school. Most of my classmates supported me, but I was too upset to care. Tabor and Gina tried to talk to me for 2 weeks leading up to the big game, but I remained angry with them. Then, on the Friday before the championship game, they approached me after my English class. They genuinely wanted to talk, but I didn't want to listen. Their actions were clear enough, yet they persisted. Finally, I lost my patience. "Leave me alone, you both hurt me. Tabor, we can only talk during practice or games, and only about football. We are not friends anymore, and I hope you both face some challenges ahead." That was the last time I spoke to Gina or Tabor until many years later when they were in need. By then, I had moved on from what happened with Gina. I came to understand that we weren't meant to be together. But at the time, it was painful. When I arrived at the state capitol for my final high school game, my hand was still stiff. Our rivals were Clinton High, and they had most of their team back from last year. The championship game was tough, with both teams performing well. We were ahead 17-14 with less than 3 minutes left. We had the ball, but it was 3rd and 8 on our 32-yard line. I thought we should pass, but the coach decided to run the ball. He was being careful. If we didn't make the first down, we would kick the ball back, and Clinton would have about 2 minutes to score. Our coach had to be pleased since our defense had done a great job in the second half. I called the play and gave the ball to Tabor. He broke through the line and looked like he might gain the first down for a moment. But then he got hit and twisted away. His foot landed. As I was pushed to the sideline, I saw Josh Witten open in the end zone and threw the ball to him. I thought he could catch it for a moment, but it slipped off his hands. Another disappointing loss. The results of that game were significant. First, the coach was let go. For the first time in 7 years, not a single senior on our team was offered a scholarship to a Division I school. I didn't even get a partial scholarship to a Division III school. Tabor's football career ended that day, too. He hurt his ankle and knee badly. Even though I was upset with him, I felt sorry for him. A healthy Tabor would have surely gotten a scholarship. I wasn't very good at school, so I knew I wouldn't get an academic scholarship, but my grades and test scores were decent enough for most colleges. Most of my friends already knew where they would go. I found out that Melinda received an academic scholarship to the University of Florida. I, however, was unsure about where to go. My parents wanted me to attend our local college, Taylor University, a Division II school. I applied to Ohio State, Florida State, and Penn State. I also applied to Taylor University to make my parents happy. The football coach at Taylor called and said he really wanted me to join the Taylor Tigers. I was almost ready to say yes when I received a call from the quarterback coach, Bob Snyder, at Florida State. Coach Snyder wanted me to come to FSU, but told me he couldn't offer me a scholarship and that I would need to earn my spot as a walk-on. If I made the team and stayed on, I would get a scholarship the next year. I needed to think about this, so I went to the Sundowner Diner. After I got my milkshake, I considered my choices. On one side, Taylor University wasn't offering me a scholarship, but my parents had saved some money for my college, wishing I would go to Taylor University. But when I told them my reasons for leaving, they understood and promised to help however they could. One good thing about my job was that I arrived at my first FSU practice in better shape than most of the other players. The hot and humid weather didn't bother me as much. After weeks of hard practice, I made the team. Coach Snyder kept his promise and gave me a full scholarship starting my second year. My parents were very happy. The only issue was that Florida State already had 4 quarterbacks, and I knew the coaches would not let me sit out the whole season. I wasn't sure what my role would be. I was relieved when they made me the placeholder since I had experience with that position. I mostly stayed on the bench, going in only for field goals and extra points. One of the best moments of the year was when we played Michigan State in the Sugar Bowl. We won when Ronnie Gardo, our place kicker, made a 51-yard field goal with just 3 seconds left in the game. My parents got to see me on national TV. But even better was seeing Jimmy Washington's look as the ball went through the posts. It was unforgettable. Sadly, it only fueled Jimmy's dislike for me. The summer after my first year, I worked for the same roofing company again. This summer was harder than the last because there were many rain showers that made it very humid, and I was on the roof most of the time. The humidity drained my energy each day, but it got me in great shape for my sophomore year. I didn't go on many dates that summer because I was really tired most of the time. When practices began in August, I was one of the few who felt relieved. Most of the team didn't like the tough workouts, but I found them easier than working on a roof in the hot Florida sun. When the season began, the coaches asked me to follow the head coach closely. Since I wasn't playing much and only practiced with the third-string team, life was pretty easy. I had gotten into a good routine with my classes and learned how to manage my time. Time management is very important for a college student. There's so much happening on campus that it's easy to forget that the main goal is to get an education. Another part of my life that really improved during my sophomore year was my social life. There were always girls who wanted to spend time with football players, so I enjoyed getting to know many of them. However, I didn't stick to any one girl for long because most of them were a bit unpredictable. Nevertheless, I had enough fun to keep myself entertained. When I returned home after my sophomore year, I looked for a job that wouldn't be as physically demanding as my earlier jobs. A friend convinced me to work at the local fish canning company. The pay was about the same as what I had earned in previous summers, so I thought it would be easier. Unfortunately, I soon found out that my job wasn't on the assembly line. I had to carry the fish into the cannery. The work was tough, and the smell was awful. By the time I realized this, all the better summer jobs were gone, so I was stuck. I didn't date much that summer because it was hard to get the fish smell off. In my junior year at FSU, I was officially the third-string quarterback until Brad Tillis had an accident and injured his leg. By default, I became the backup quarterback. I still had my placeholder duties, which led to a memorable moment in the game against our rivals, the University of Florida. The game was intense and rough. Both teams had a lot of penalties. There were a few small skirmishes, but they didn't escalate. In the fourth quarter, we were ahead 20-17 with about 6 minutes left to play. We drove down to Florida's 23-yard line, but the drive came to a halt as the kicking team entered. It should have been an easy 3 points, but the snap from the center bounced in front of me. I managed to grab it, but I couldn't get the ball down, so I had to scramble. I looked around for someone to pass to, but no one was available. Then, our kicker, John Albin, made a great block that gave me a chance. The left side of the field opened up and I took off. With almost 3 minutes left, we were only ahead by 3 points. We couldn't move the ball on our next possession and had to punt. Florida advanced again, reaching our 46-yard line. But with 57 seconds left, Ned Tyler intercepted the ball, and we held on to win, 27-24. The rivalry between Florida State and Florida is intense, so winning felt amazing. What happened after the game was even more surprising. It was a home game, and after showering, I planned to head back to my room to study before checking out some parties. But when I came out of the locker room, I was surprised to see Melinda waiting for me. "Hey, stranger," she called out. "Too bad you played such a great game. If you hadn't scored, we would have won." "Yeah, right," I smiled back. "What are you doing here?" "Don't you remember? I go to UF." She laughed. "Yeah, but this is Tallahassee, not Gainesville." Melinda laughed again. "I have a car and know how to follow signs. Besides, a lot of Gator fans were at the game." "So, are you going to take me out to dinner or what?" "Dinner sounds great," I said with a smile. "What do you want to eat?" "I just want to catch up with someone I liked in high school," Melinda said with a grin. "Got it. But what kind of food do you have in mind?" Melinda chose Chinese food, and we had a fun night. We talked about what we had been up to since high school. Melinda had become quite beautiful, and I noticed the looks we were getting from the other guests in the restaurant. During dinner, I asked her if she was still upset with me for messing up her evening with Jimmy. She chuckled and admitted that she had been planning a special night with him when I interrupted. She told me that she had heard a lot about big guys and was curious. I joked that the stories were mostly myths, and she burst out laughing when I started sharing some funny moments I had experienced. I told her that some guys were showing off baseball bats, but most were just carrying hot dogs instead. The same went for the other guys, too. I mentioned that it wasn't about the size of the equipment, but how well someone could use it. My silly comments made Melinda laugh a lot. After she finished laughing, Melinda got serious and said that breaking up her date with Jimmy was actually a good thing. She said he ended up dating Sarah Winters, a girl who was really drawn to him. According to Melinda, things got complicated when Sarah caught an illness from him. "Oh man, I would have been so embarrassed if that were me," Melinda said, "especially having to explain it to my dad." We spent the weekend together, and I felt like we were connecting. The game against Florida had been our last of the season. We had 5 weeks until we played Alabama in the Cotton Bowl, and I was able to visit Melinda every weekend. I stayed with a couple of friends who went to the university. We had a lot of fun, but I made it clear that Melinda and I were just friends. In the Cotton Bowl, we lost badly, but I got to play the last quarter when we were already behind. I managed to lead a couple of drives that ended in touchdowns, but Alabama scored again too, so my effort didn't matter much. Still, it impressed Melinda, and that made me happy. With football season over, I could focus more on my studies and spending time with Melinda. I was driving back and forth between Tallahassee and Gainesville a lot. Most of my visits were short, usually just for dinner and maybe dancing. When the school year ended, we both went back home. Even though I had moved on from Gina, I wanted to take my time with Melinda. But I had developed strong feelings for her and wanted to move forward in our relationship. We hadn't grown closer in an intimate way yet, but I hoped that would change over the summer. However, things took a sudden turn. In the summer before my senior year, I looked for a job that wouldn't be too stressful. Luckily, I got offers for 2 jobs thanks to my role with the Seminoles. One was in Tallahassee at the Florida Department of Revenue, which would help my resume since I was studying business. The other was at a local grocery store, which I got because I was somewhat known in the area. I decided to take the grocery store job so I could stay close to Melinda. I was set to attend an orientation that Monday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. I told Melinda I would pick her up that evening for a nice dinner. After the orientation class, which only had one other guy and me, we wrapped things up around noon. I decided to call Melinda to see if she wanted to hang out and grab an early dinner before we went dancing. Unfortunately, my calls went straight to her voicemail. With no luck reaching Melinda, I thought I'd get some lunch. I was in a good mood until I walked into the diner. In the dim back booth, I almost missed seeing them. As I got closer, I was shocked to find Jimmy leaning in close to Melinda, their conversation seeming particularly intimate. It felt just like the time with Gina and Tabor, but this was worse. Melinda had betrayed me with Jimmy Washington. "Oh, this is just great," I said, feeling angry. "You finally did it, Jimmy. You took my girlfriend. I hope you both are happy together." "No!" Melinda shouted while Jimmy just smiled. "Jason, it's not what it looks like. Please let me explain. Why do people always say that when it seems exactly like what it looks like?" It seemed clear to me that my girlfriend was sharing a moment with someone I didn't like, and it was hard to witness. Since our last meeting, I had gotten bigger and stronger, and I knew I could confront Jimmy. But if I did that, I would lose my scholarship, so I just left. As I drove away, my phone lit up with messages from Melinda. I didn't want to answer any of them. Instead, I called the Florida Department of Revenue to ask if the job offer was still available. They said it was, but I needed to be there by tomorrow, or the job would go to someone else. Next, I called Publix to thank them for the job offer, but told them I needed to return to Tallahassee. The manager, knowing I was a local star, understood and wished me the best for the next season. At home, I explained my sudden change of plans to my mom and dad, packed my bags, and set off for Tallahassee. As I drove back to Florida, I had time to think and calm down. I realized that Melinda and I hadn't actually promised to be exclusive. I had just assumed we were. We hadn't even taken things to the next level, and since we hadn't made any promises, Melinda was free to do as she liked. Still, it hurt a lot. Jimmy had hurt me again, and I vowed he would pay for it someday. Once I started my job with the Department of Revenue, I quickly learned a few things about government work. First, knowing the right people mattered more than what you actually know. Being set to be Florida State's starting quarterback next season seemed to rank higher than job skills. I also discovered that many government workers wouldn't last a day in a typical job. Finally, I figured out that no successful business could ever run like the government does. The situation at work was frustrating. Many of my coworkers didn't seem to want to put in the effort. They were friendly enough, but not very hardworking. Even though they didn't do much, they often complained about not getting paid enough. I chose to stay quiet about it. During my time there, I learned a lot about how the government functions. Even though many employees grumbled about their salaries, they were often earning more than people in similar jobs in the private sector. On top of that, they had better benefits. I realized I was earning more in my summer job with the state than I would have at a grocery store. It was surprising. Despite not feeling great about my job, coming back to Tallahassee turned out to be a good choice. I could work out at the local stadium all summer. I focused on building my strength, especially in my legs and arms. I found out that Terry Schuster, a wide receiver from the previous year, was also in town for summer classes. We started working out together a few times a week. Then we met Warren Porter, a talented recruit who had started school early, and he joined us for our workouts. As the summer progressed, the three of us trained together. Warren was very fast and skilled at catching the ball. I could see that Terry had yet to show what he could really do. He ran great routes and caught almost everything I threw his way. About 2 weeks after returning to Tallahassee, I realized I hadn't settled things with Melinda. It started to bother me that I hadn't treated her well, and I felt the need to apologize and end our relationship. She was lovely, but I wasn't sure I could trust her. I was nervous when I finally decided to call her. "Jason," she answered, sounding unsure. Yeah, it's me. I want to say I'm sorry for how I left things. I shouldn't have reacted the way I did. We never said we were exclusive, so I just wanted to apologize." "Jason, there's nothing going on between Jimmy and me," she replied quickly. "Melinda, that's not the point." I didn't want to discuss that now. "I think it's best if we take a step back for now. Maybe we can reconnect later." "Jason, I'm going back to UF next week for some classes," she said eagerly. "Why don't you come visit, or I can come up to Tallahassee? We could talk things through." "I don't think that would be a good idea," I quickly said, wanting to avoid meeting up. "I have a lot going on right now. Maybe after the football season we can meet up if we want to. I hate to end this call, Melinda, but I have an appointment." "Okay, Jason." I could hear she was a bit sad. "I hope you have a great season." After the phone call, I still felt uneasy. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had avoided a tough future. Now I could focus on football and school. Once the season was over, I would finish my degree and graduate. After that, I didn't know what would happen. I certainly didn't expect to meet Stacy Carlson. I met Stacy in the library. School hadn't started yet, but I already had my schedule for the fall term, which included a class called The Reality of Economics Today. This class would talk about current economic ideas and past economic mistakes. I had to read 2 books, Freakonomics by Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubner, and Capitalism and Freedom by Milton Friedman. I thought both books might be hard to find, so I checked the library. I found the Friedman book, but Freakonomics was already checked out. I decided to see when it would be returned and went to the checkout desk. While standing behind a girl in line, I noticed she had Freakonomics in her hands. I couldn't help but laugh. "I see you have the book I want," I said, still chuckling. The girl turned and smiled at me, and it felt like a ray of sunshine. She was about 5'5" and had a slender build. With her short blonde hair and the brightest blue eyes I'd ever seen, she seemed delicate, and I felt a strong urge to look out for her. I wouldn't call her beautiful, but there was something about her that made my heart race a little. "Are you returning that book?" she asked. "No, I'm just about to check it out. And I was looking for the book you have," I laughed. "I think we're both in the same class, right? The Reality of Economics today?" "Yes," she giggled. "I'm Stacy Carlson." She extended her hand and I shook it warmly. "I'm Jason Saunders," I said, stepping back to see if she recognized me. Most students probably wouldn't know me just by my face. I mean, put on a football uniform and a helmet, and even your own mom might not know who you are. But most students who followed football at Florida State, which was most people in Tallahassee, knew my name. Stacy, though, had no idea who I was, and I liked that. "So what should we do about needing each other's book?" Stacy asked with a shy smile. "I guess that depends on how long it takes you to read yours," I replied with a big smile. "I can finish mine in a week." "You really need that long to read it?" She giggled. "Yeah, I like to take notes as I go, but you didn't answer. Can you finish yours in a week?" "Of course I can," Stacy replied, smiling as she playfully nibbled her thumb. I had never believed in love at first sight, but I was starting to change my mind. "Then why don't we meet here in a week to return our books? We can borrow new ones then." "Sounds good," Stacy said with a smile, handing me her number. "And if you finish early, give me a call." I gave her my number in return. I sped through my book and finished it 3 days later. I didn't take as many notes as I wanted, but I was more eager to see Stacy again. When I called to share that I had finished, she laughed and said she had finished hers in 2 days. We decided to meet at the library the next day to swap books. I quickly asked her to join me for lunch. That turned into lunch 3 or 4 times a week. During our lunches, I learned that Stacy was an only child and had moved from James Madison College in Michigan. Her parents were divorced, and she lived with her mom. Stacy was studying communications with a minor in business. The more time I spent with her, the more I realized I was developing feelings for her. There was something special about her. Finally, I found the courage to ask Stacy out, but she told me she had plans for Friday and Saturday and was going to visit her mom on Sunday. Still, she said she would be free the next weekend and encouraged me to call her during the week. I felt a bit let down that she was busy, but I was happy that she wanted me to reach out again. Unfortunately, Stacy got sick and had to leave school for the semester. I heard she had mono, but I couldn't get in touch with her. I tried calling several times, but was told she was resting or at the doctor's office. I had a feeling that maybe she was avoiding me. Not knowing the truth, I eventually stopped calling since I needed to focus on the upcoming football season. Still, I felt very disappointed. As spring training began, everyone expected me to be the starting quarterback, but I quickly saw that I faced some tough competition. Florida State had recruited a 5-star quarterback from a high school in California who was being compared to Tom Brady. His name was Jackson Samuels. They also brought in a 4-star quarterback from Louisiana named Chad Foster, who was an impressive 6 feet 6 inches tall and weighed 250 pounds. He was as big as some of our linebackers. As practice started, it was clear that the coaches were really excited about their 2 new players. To them, it felt like I was being overlooked. As I watched Jackson during practice, I quickly understood he wasn't like Tom Brady. He was a scrambler. He had a strong arm and threw accurately when he had time. But I noticed that Jackson had a significant challenge with moving around too much. As soon as things got tough in the pocket, he would run away. The coaches seemed to only focus on his perfect passes when he was safe and the yardage he gained while running. Chad was different. He also had a strong arm, but he wasn't as good as Jackson. He had a unique way of throwing, and while he had talent, he hadn't developed it well. Chad showed clear signs of whether he was going to throw or run, and after paying attention for a while, I could tell which plays he had called just by how he stood. After the first day, I tried to help Chad improve, but it turned out he didn't want any advice. He rejected everything I suggested. I shared my concerns with the quarterback coach, who agreed with me. The next day, Chad confronted me for talking to the coach. From then on, I decided to keep my distance from him. I wasn't going to help him anymore. By the end of spring practice, Jackson was named the starting quarterback, with Chad as the backup, and I was in my usual spot as the third-string quarterback. I won't pretend I wasn't disappointed, but football never defined my life, so being third string wasn't new to me. As the third-string quarterback, I had one main job, which wasn't glamorous. I carried the clipboard with plays and followed the coach around. The upside was that sometimes I got to wear the headset, but I never got to sit down. Being around the coach was tough. He yelled a lot, and I still had to carry my helmet. Our first game was against Louisiana Tech, and we won easily, 48-3, with Jackson scoring 2 touchdowns and running for 2 more. People started talking about him potentially winning the Heisman Trophy. However, things took a turn in the next game when we lost to North Carolina, and Jackson struggled. We barely won against Duke, but then we had Miami coming up, which was a big rival for us. At Florida State, a coach could have a bad season, but if he won against Miami or Florida, he might keep his job. Miami had a strong defense that year, and they pressed Jackson all game long. As I expected, he took off running as soon as he felt any pressure. It didn't take long for Miami's defense to catch on to this and control. Chad came in and led 2 decent drives, with one ending in a field goal. Our record was now 2-2, and I knew I would not be starting in the next game. I practiced with the second team that week, but I was surprised when Chad wasn't named the starter. Instead, the coaches decided to go back to Jackson. I thought they might rest Jackson after the tough time he had in the Miami game. That game really affected Jackson. We lost to North Carolina State in our lowest-scoring game of the year, 7-3. I didn't say much during the game. I thought the coach would see that Jackson wasn't ready. But Chad talked a lot during and after the game, which didn't win him any favors with the team. Still, the coaches seemed to notice and started him against Clemson, but he struggled in the first half. By halftime, we were down 27-10. Our points came from a defensive touchdown and a field goal after recovering a fumble. Finally, the coaches decided I would start the second half. Looking around the locker room, I noticed my teammates were smiling. I saw relief on Jackson's face and frustration on Chad's. It felt good that my teammates were happy I was going in. We started the second half by returning the kickoff for a touchdown, giving us great energy. The defense stopped Clemson on their next series, and I helped lead our team on a drive from our 22-yard line down the field for another score. Now it was just a 3-point game, 27-24. Clemson managed to get a field goal, but that was all they scored for the rest of the game. I moved our team down again for 2 more touchdowns and a field goal. We won with a final score of 41-30, and I was now the starting quarterback for Florida State. We went on to win the rest of our games that season, including a 28-14 victory over Florida. With an 8-3 record, we were invited to the Gator Bowl, where we faced Michigan State again. Jimmy was still playing for them, having been red-shirted his freshman year, which meant his eligibility would start in his second year. He was having a great season with over 1,400 receiving yards, leading to discussions about him being picked in the first round of the NFL draft. The bowl game wasn't close. We won 31-14, but Jimmy scored both of Michigan State's touchdowns. I threw for 307 yards with 1 touchdown and an interception. That day, our team played really well, controlling the game and scoring 3 touchdowns. Now that the season was over, I focused on my studies at college. Stacy had returned to school, and we started dating again. Oddly, she didn't want to talk about her recent illness. I guessed she might be shy about having had a common virus, so I didn't bring it up. The last semester of school was quite interesting. I was doing well in my classes, but felt unsure about football. I thought there were at least 10 players on the Florida State team who had a good chance of being drafted, but I wasn't sure if I was one of them. However, when I received an invitation to the NFL Combine, I felt like I might have a shot. It was a surprise and an honor to be invited, since only 335 college players were selected. The Combine happens each year in Indianapolis in late February. Coaches and scouts from all 32 NFL teams come to watch the invited college players take part in various drills. This event gives teams a chance to meet the players up close before the NFL draft in April. I trained for this event, but sadly I got sick the week before. By the time I got to the combine, I was only at about 80%. Because of that, I didn't perform as well as I hoped, which left me feeling disappointed. When I got back from Indianapolis, Stacy noticed I was upset. She tried to cheer me up, and she did a great job. I was surprised to hear that she had watched the combine on TV. Millions of fans follow the NFL draft closely. Stacy's humorous descriptions of what she saw made me laugh a lot. At one point, she compared one of the drills to a chicken trying hard to escape. As the semester started to wrap up, Stacy and I managed our studies well. We had been dating throughout the semester and had grown closer. Even though we hadn't talked about it, I thought we were both exclusive. Each date seemed to strengthen our connection. There was one more NFL-related event I needed to attend. Each university holds a pro day for players who might make it to the NFL. The number of visiting coaches depends on which players interest them. At Florida State, there were a dozen players getting ready for the workouts, and I was one of them. I felt I did great at Florida State's pro day, and a few coaches spoke with me afterward. However, none of them said I would be drafted. I wasn't upset because I believed my future might lead me elsewhere, possibly including starting a life with Stacy. Stacy and I finished our last exams the day before the draft began. A celebration was set up in the lounge of the athletes' dorm. When I arrived, the big TV on the wall was showing the NFL Network, but the sound was off because the draft hadn't started yet. Music played in the background, drinks were flowing, and some people were dancing. I picked up a drink and looked for Stacy. My heart sank when I spotted her. She was in the middle of the floor, dancing closely with Jimmy. I tossed my drink in the trash and walked over to them, feeling nervous with each step. As I reached Stacy, Jimmy noticed me and grinned. "Hey, look who it is," Jimmy said with a smug smile. "I see you've met my fiancé." Stacy shook her head at him and smiled at me. "Jimmy told me you two are friends from high school." "Friends?" I scoffed. "Congratulations, Jimmy, you've done it again." I turned and started to walk away. "Jason," Stacy called after me. "Where are you going?" I didn't reply, I just kept walking. Seeing Stacy with someone I didn't like at all was heartbreaking. Once I was outside the dorm, I ran with tears in my eyes until I was too tired to continue. I thought Stacy and I shared something special, and learning she was engaged to Jimmy felt crushing. Once again, Jimmy had ruined my chance at happiness. This time, it hurt more than ever. I wandered to the stadium and sat in the stands for hours. Eventually, I went back to my room, trying to think of what to do next. It became clear to me that all I wanted was to go home. I quickly packed my things, loaded them into my car, and hit the road. As I left town, my phone rang, but I tossed it aside. When I got home, I told my parents I had finished my studies and would graduate with a business degree and a minor in accounting. They were a bit disappointed when I said I wouldn't attend the graduation ceremony. I didn't want to risk bumping into Stacy or Jimmy. As expected, I wasn't drafted. But I found it amusing that Jimmy was picked near the end of the 4th round by Tennessee. Many experts had predicted he would go much earlier. When he was finally chosen, everyone thought it was a great deal for Tennessee. But the coaches knew what I knew. Jimmy was very fast, but had trouble catching the ball. That drop in the draft likely cost him a lot of money. Even though I thought I didn't care, I had to admit I was disappointed about not being drafted. After about a week, I came to terms with the fact that no team needed me. I had only played a few games in college, and my stats were low. Accepting this, I decided it was time to look for a real job. I hadn't been looking for long when Ray Sullivan, the quarterback coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, called me. He invited me to their training camp. Ray told me they could offer me $5,000 since I wasn't drafted, but he believed I had the skills to be an NFL quarterback. So I decided to give it a shot. I stayed with Tampa through their training activities and mini camps. I also got to play in one preseason game. I knew my place on the team, but I worked hard anyway. When the preseason came, I was with Tampa for one game when Coach Sullivan asked me to come into his office. "This is the hardest part of being a coach," Ray said after I sat down. "We have a chance to bring in some experienced players who could really help us. Unfortunately, we need to let some players go, and you are one of them." I felt let down, but not completely hopeless. I hadn't thought I would even get this far. Tampa had paid me $5,000 and $800 a week to play football. which was a great opportunity. Even though I only got to play a little, I knew I could compete at this level. "Coach, getting this far is more than I ever hoped for," I said, smiling as I stood and shook his hand. "Thank you for the chance. I wish you all the best this season." Coach Sullivan shook my hand back. "For what it's worth, I tried to keep you instead of Andy Wilder. He probably won't make it anyway. Jason, I believe your career isn't over. Keep your phone close. I've had inquiries about you, and I told them you're worth a look. You might get picked up by another team." The coach was right. Atlanta called, and I joined them for the last 2 preseason games. However, I was let go when they had to make final cuts. Still, I got to play a bit and even threw a touchdown pass. At that point, I thought my journey was done, so I headed home ready to look for a regular job. I had just dropped my suitcase on the bed when my phone rang. It was the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they wanted me to take the first flight out. Their star quarterback, John Buckner, was getting older, and their backup, Mark Runner, was hurt. They needed a third quarterback. They sent me 10 pages of plays and asked me to memorize as many as I could on the flight. One thing that helped me was my good memory. By the time I landed in Pittsburgh, I had learned all the plays they sent. They put me through a tryout and were surprised at how much I remembered. At the end of the tryout, they signed me to a rookie contract. I was officially in the NFL. I signed a 3-year contract worth $2,025,000. My first-year salary was $610,000, while my second and third-year pay was $660,000 and $785,000. When I shared my contract details with my parents and some friends, they thought I was wealthy, but that wasn't true. None of that money was guaranteed. I only got paid for each game if I was part of the team's active roster. If they released me 3 games into the season, I would only earn money for those 3 games. Still, that would be about $36,000 a game, which was a decent amount. My goal then was simply to stay with the team as long as I could. As it happened, John played every game, while Mark only stepped in for 2 games when we had already won. I got to play in one game where we won by 48 points, and I was in for the last 4 plays. True, all I did was take the snap and kneel down, but it still counted. I ended up with -4 yards that season. It wasn't impressive, but at least I had a stat in the NFL. However, at the end of the season, Pittsburgh let me go. I wasn't surprised or upset by it. John, as expected, retired after the season. Pittsburgh then drafted a new quarterback. Since they were going to pay him a lot of money, he would definitely start. They still had Mark and picked up another quarterback, Jim Tabor, who was a solid player. So they didn't need a third-string player like me. After the season ended, I returned to my parents' house. One morning, while having breakfast and thinking about my next steps, my mom pushed a newspaper in front of me. I was annoyed and tried to move it away. "Didn't you go to school with Jimmy Washington?" she asked. "Yeah, we played on the football team together," I replied, taking another bite of cereal. "Well, he received an award from the Chamber of Commerce," my mother insisted, pushing the paper towards me again. I looked down at the paper and it hit me hard. There was a picture of Jimmy and Stacy, as if things weren't tough enough for me. Being cut by Pittsburgh was bad, but seeing Stacy with Jimmy was even harder to bear. I stared at the picture for a long moment, tracing Stacy's face with my finger. I couldn't help it. I still had feelings for her. Seeing her with Jimmy made me feel down for the next 2 weeks. I think my parents were getting a little worried about me until I finally got an agent. He kept encouraging me about finding a new team. Throughout the summer, my agent worked hard to find me a spot on a team, any team. Luckily, he found me an opportunity with the Chargers at the next year's training camp, but I was cut before the second preseason game. I was frustrated because I played well in the one game I was in. I had 2 quarters against the Browns, throwing for 114 yards, 1 touchdown, and no interceptions, but I was still let go. After that, I joined Dallas, but I didn't really like the atmosphere there. From the very start, I felt out of place and knew I wouldn't last long. I was let go after the second preseason game. I hadn't played poorly. I completed passes for 94 yards with no mistakes, and we scored a field goal during my one good drive. But professional football is a tough business, and teams can drop you quickly, especially if they believe they have found someone better and cheaper. I wasn't too troubled about being cut twice in the preseason. I had saved nearly $350,000 after taxes from my salary last year. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was more than most people have saved. What many don't realize is that NFL contracts can be tricky. The only money a player is guaranteed is clearly stated in the contract. For example, if a player signs a contract worth $100 million with $30 million guaranteed, that's the only amount he knows he will definitely receive. The upside is that if something unfortunate happens early on, like an injury that ends his career, he will still receive that guaranteed amount. The downside is if he plays for 2 years, he might already have all his guaranteed money, and the team can cut him without owing anything more. After being let go by Dallas, I started looking for other job opportunities. Before I could find any, I received a call from the New York Jets and secured a spot with them for the season. The benefit of being a second-year player in the NFL was that they had to pay me at least $675,000 or a share based on how long I remained with the team. This meant I would earn about $40,000 per game, which I thought was decent for sitting on the sidelines. During my year in New York, I managed to save about $275,000. From the $675,000, living in New York was incredibly costly, and I made the mistake of moving into the city as some teammates advised. The apartment was expensive and in poor condition. With all the living expenses, taxes, and fees, it felt like I was losing a lot of my earnings. Still, I tried not to complain since I wasn't getting much attention from other teams at the time. One good thing about playing for the Jets was that I got more opportunities on the field. I didn't start any games, but I was on the field for 43 plays and even threw for 1 touchdown. I also got to be part of the special teams, which was enjoyable. I was able to make 7 tackles before the opposing team could advance the ball. However, I wasn't surprised or upset when the Jets let me go after the season. I had no desire to return to New York. It was not the best experience for me. After 2 seasons, I was worried that no one would want me again. Being a third-year player, I knew it was often cheaper for teams to bring in a newcomer and pay them less. Who would want to pay someone almost $800,000 just to sit on the sidelines? But my worries were unfounded when I got a call from Tennessee. At first, I felt uneasy about being on the same team as Jimmy, but then I found out he had been traded to Arizona for a 6th-round draft pick. Even though I didn't like Jimmy, I thought Arizona was making a good deal. It turned out that wasn't the case. I stayed with the Tennessee team until after the second preseason game. Until then, I was sure I would make the team. I had played well in both games and thrown a touchdown in each. But the business side of football caught up with me. Tennessee decided to sign a quarterback from the Canadian Football League who was less expensive. I was at the Nashville airport when my phone rang. It was the general manager of the Buffalo Bills. Their backup quarterback, Drew Anderson, had a second concussion during training camp. Even though Buffalo's starting quarterback, Roger Stark, was still healthy, he was 40 years old. This made Buffalo nervous about relying only on those 2 quarterbacks. They wanted some backup, so they offered me $1.1 million to join them, along with a $50,000 signing bonus. The rest of the contract wasn't guaranteed, but I knew this was a pivotal moment in my career, even if I didn't realize it at the time. The culture in Buffalo was relaxed, and I felt comfortable right away. However, I was a bit nervous working with Roger. Thankfully, he made me feel at ease from the start. He was not only an excellent quarterback, but also a great mentor. He constantly helped me throughout training camp and the season. I thought I understood what it took to be a quarterback in the NFL, but working with Roger every day showed me how much I still needed to learn. Roger taught me many techniques teams use to hide their defenses and how to best guide my receivers. He even showed me how to release the ball faster. Watching game film with Roger was a learning experience in itself. He noticed things that even the coaches missed. I felt like I had improved as a quarterback. But when the season began, I found myself in the 3rd-string role. It reminded me of my days at Florida State, walking beside the coach during practice. The good part was that I got to wear the headset most of the time, as Coach Staumbaugh preferred it when he wanted to talk to the coaches upstairs. Buffalo had a fantastic season, and Roger started every game. Drew only played a little bit, and since he hadn't played much, he was doing fine. In reality, they didn't really need me, but for some reason they kept me on the team. I was having the best time of my life being part of a winning NFL team and getting ready to marry my fiancée. But as they say, all good things must come to an end. Near the end of my time with the Buffalo team, my love life faced more trouble. And yes, it was Jimmy's doing. For a while, I thought I had found a woman I cared for deeply, almost as much as I had cared for Stacy. I used to think that Jimmy was just bothering me. At first, I thought it was exciting, but over time, being with someone I didn't truly care for began to lose its charm. Still, I did meet some interesting women. I dated a few models and went on several dates with Miss Colorado, Sandra Folsom. She was charming and fun, not like the others who were just looking for a carefree time. I started to develop feelings for her until things became more serious. The morning after our first date, she began discussing future plans. I thought that was moving too fast. After that, Sandra became a bit clingy and demanding, so I decided to end things. I braced for her reaction, but it didn't come. Instead, she began dating Lance Turbin, one of my teammates. They got married just 3 months later, but that marriage only lasted 8 months. Despite her beauty, Sandra had some challenges. While I was in Tennessee for a short time, I met Wendy Worthington, who later became my fiancée. She was a true Southern belle, and her soft brown eyes sparkled when she smiled. It was her charming accent and grace that really caught my attention. She was petite, but her presence was strong. Wendy made me feel like I was the most important person in her life. We started dating just 3 days after we met, but I thought it wouldn't last when the Tennessee team let me go. However, Wendy insisted on staying in touch. I didn't believe it would lead anywhere, but I underestimated her determination. Her father was quite wealthy, owning several fitness clubs. Wendy had franchised her gyms called Worthington Fitness, and they were all over the country. When I first met her, Wendy was the company's financial officer. We both shared a background in business. To make a long story short, Wendy talked her father into letting her work from Buffalo. Even though she wanted a serious relationship, I hesitated. I knew Wendy had changed boyfriends many times before, and I was still cautious after my last relationship. But when Wendy arrived in Buffalo with 6 suitcases at the start of the season, I thought she was really committed. I assumed she'd stay with me in my apartment. However, she decided to rent her own place. Wendy explained that she needed a space to work and meet clients. She set up her apartment like an office. Our relationship moved forward, and we got engaged by the 12th week of the season. We planned to marry the following July. But things quickly changed when I found out she had been unfaithful. Although Wendy usually stayed at my place, sometimes, if she worked late, I would sleep at hers. I never thought much of it back then, but I didn't have a key to her apartment. I should have been more careful, but I was in love. On the Friday before the AFC Championship game, we had a light practice that finished by 10 in the morning. With time to spare, I headed over to Wendy's office. As I parked, I saw her assistant leaving. I felt good about that because it meant Wendy would be alone. I was going to ring the bell, but I thought the door might be unlocked since her assistant had just left. I walked in and went to Wendy's office, but I stopped when I heard sounds coming from the bedroom. I opened the door and was shocked. Wendy was with another man. I recognized him as Daryl Hawks, a player from another team. I walked to the bed quietly and took Wendy's engagement ring off her finger as she cried out. For a moment, I considered confronting Daryl, but decided it wasn't worth it. "Oh no, Jason, please don't go. I can explain. I love you," Wendy pleaded. As I turned to leave, I heard Daryl laugh. "Jimmy said you were an easy target, and he was right. Wendy was just waiting to be with someone else." At that moment, I felt anger rising in me. I turned back, ready to confront him. Daryl was shocked to see me turn around and tried to jump out of bed. However, he got caught in the blanket and fell to the floor. In my frustration, I acted without thinking and kicked him. "Please, Jason, don't hurt him," Wendy shouted. "They'll call the police." In my anger, I hadn't thought about that, but I knew something about Daryl that would keep him quiet. He had been in trouble before for his relationships with married women, which meant his contract had strict rules. If he got mixed up with another woman, he would lose his job. I stood over him as he sat there stunned. "Listen carefully. If you call the police, I will tell everyone about you and my fiancé. The team wouldn't like that. They would probably get rid of you, so think about what you want to do." Daryl looked up and nodded. I noticed that the last thing I heard was Wendy crying, but I didn't care. Knowing that Jimmy was involved made me firm in my decision. There was no way I would take her back. Even though he hadn't been present, Jimmy had caused problems in my relationships before. It was good he wasn't around, or I might have acted out. Wendy called, texted, emailed, and even sent me a telegram. I ignored them all. Her father called me as well, but I didn't want to tell him the truth. Instead, I told him that his daughter was too controlling, and he accepted that. Thinking about it, I shouldn't have been surprised that Wendy and Jimmy had something going on. Wendy's father had connections with the Tennessee Titans, and Jimmy would have noticed someone like her. Jimmy had been drafted by the Titans, but after 2 seasons, they traded him to Arizona. I thought Arizona got a good deal. He wasn't perfect, but he could make big plays. However, other players said that Jimmy was trouble in the locker room. It bothered me that he ruined lives but faced no consequences. As I drove away from Wendy, I felt a mix of anger and betrayal. A lonely ache filled me. Luckily, I had something to focus on: the AFC Championship game. The game actually took my mind off my troubles for a few hours. Everyone thought the game would be close, but Roger played brilliantly against Denver's defense. He threw 3 touchdown passes, leading us to a convincing 38-17 victory over the Broncos. Even though I didn't step onto the field, I felt just as thrilled as the rest of my teammates. That's one of the great things about being part of a team. It feels like family, and you always want the best for each member. The joy carried me through to the next morning, but soon the hurt from Wendy's betrayal began to weigh on me. Love can be beautiful, but losing it brings a sadness I wouldn't wish on anyone. Well, maybe I would wish it on Jimmy, since he caused so much hurt for many people, including me. A few days later, I managed to push most of my feelings aside as we got ready for the Super Bowl. I've never understood why it's called Super. It just seems like another championship game to me. Other sports, like baseball, also make a big deal out of their championships. I mean, the World Series? How can it call itself that when only American teams are involved? Whatever the reason, there was so much going on that I didn't have much time to think about Wendy. Even as the third-string quarterback, I gave many interviews and attended countless team events. Plus, I focused on preparing for the big game, as if I might be the starting quarterback. As game time neared, all I could think about was the match ahead. The experts had predicted the Packers would have a slight edge, but by halftime, it looked like we were facing a tough loss. Unfortunately, the Packers were dominating us. In the first quarter, Green Bay made a long drive and scored first. Roger had a rare mistake and threw an interception that led to a touchdown. Before we knew it, we were down 14, 0 less than 6 minutes into the game. Things went from bad to worse on our next series. Roger tried to escape trouble when the defense was closing in, but he twisted his ankle when he went to slide. He had to be carried off the field. Drew rushed in to take his place, but just a couple of plays later, he threw an interception too. Green Bay scored yet again just a few plays after that. On the next kickoff, Ronnie Tanner fumbled the ball, and Green Bay quickly took advantage, making it 28-0. The rest of the first half was a struggle for us, while Green Bay managed to score once more. Finally, halftime arrived. With the score at 35-0, we felt completely defeated. I sat in the quiet locker room, realizing that no team in Super Bowl history had ever come back from such a large deficit. The coach stayed silent for 10 minutes as he looked over notes, leaving us to reflect on how to move forward. Finally, he looked up and pointed at me. "Jason, you're starting the second half." I glanced around and saw my teammates nodding and smiling. Then I noticed Terry Schuster and Warren Porter. They had joined the team at different times, but mostly practiced with the second team like I did. "Coach," I said quickly, "I'd like to play with Terry and Warren." "Brad and Jerry are better," he replied. "That may be true," I insisted, "but I have practiced with Terry and Warren almost all season. I know how they play." The coach thought for a moment and then nodded. "Okay, we'll give it a try." We kicked off to start the second half. Oddly, I wasn't nervous. I focused on each play as it was given to me and did my best. With surprising skill, we made our way down the field and finished with a field goal. The team's energy began to rise. The coach's changes to the defense turned the game around. They stopped the Packers on their first series and controlled the game for the rest of the afternoon. I led 3 scoring drives of 6, 8, and 9 plays. The defense intercepted a pass and scored another touchdown. With just under 2 minutes left, we were down 35-31. Having Terry and Warren on the field was a great choice. Warren caught 2 touchdown passes, and Terry kept 3 drives alive with 5 important catches. We got the ball back at our own 9-yard line with just over a minute left. I quickly threw a 12-yard pass to Warren, and he got out of bounds. The drive went on until it was 4th down and 8 yards to go at our 43-yard line. Terry made a big play, catching a pass that was a bit behind him for a 9-yard gain. We needed to use our second timeout. With only 12 seconds left and facing 4th down again, I had to throw to Terry again for a 7-yard gain, which gave us a first down. We were now on the Packers' 9-yard line but had to use our last timeout. Now, there were just 3 seconds left in the game. It was time for one last pass. When the ball was snapped, I scanned the field as Roger had taught me, but no one was open. Then I spotted Terry in the end zone and threw the ball. Just as it left my hand, I felt a rush of fear as I saw the safety move in front. He easily caught the pass. The game was over and I had lost the Super Bowl. No one on the team saw it that way. I realized this when a television reporter asked me about the last drive, and I openly said that we lost because of me. I explained that I should have noticed the safety waiting for the chance, but I didn't. Right away, 3 teammates jumped in to defend me, saying it wasn't just my fault. I really appreciated them standing up for me. Still, I felt like I had let the team down. Management must have agreed with what I thought because I was let go 2 weeks later. No explanation was given. That's just how professional football works. In the month that followed, I had 2 good things happen, and 1 not-so-good thing. The 2 good things were getting my pay for the AFC Championship game and the loser's share of the Super Bowl. Together, these added up to $116,000, which I placed with my financial advisor. The not-so-good news was when my agent called to say my contract with him was ending. Even worse, but I suspected the real reason was that he had signed 3 top draft picks the year before and wanted to improve his image by letting go of less well-known players. At that moment, both my football career and my personal life were in a difficult place. It felt as if the NFL was finished with me and my love life was non-existent. I couldn't see a way for either to improve. I was about to find out that I was wrong about both. After the disappointing end of my football career and being let go by the Buffalo Bills, I hit a low point. After 3 years in the NFL, I thought my chance of playing again was very slim. So I decided it was time to get serious about finding that real job I had often mentioned. Even though I wasn't feeling motivated, I managed to arrange 3 job interviews. I had meetings lined up with Ford Motor, Merrill Lynch, and a local bank, First Century, which had branches in 9 states. After my meeting with Ford Motor, I felt like no one there could make a decision without checking with a couple of others first. My meeting with Merrill Lynch left me feeling quite unsettled when I got home. However, my meeting with First Century was a pleasant surprise. I met with Carl Domino, the chairman of the board and the main shareholder of the bank. Carl was a friendly 54-year-old man. Even though his hair was gray, he looked younger. He had grown the bank from 1 small branch into a bank with 64 branches across 9 states. He wanted me to help with their marketing and plans for expansion because he was already working on ideas to expand into 6 more states. Carl dreamed of going nationwide. The salary offered was a fraction of what I had made with the Bills. Still, it promised stability, and I could see a real future. There was another positive aspect of the job, although I didn't realize it at first. I would be working with Charlotte Domino, Carl's daughter, who was the executive vice president of First Century. However, when I first met her, I was skeptical about the job. Charlotte was an impressive woman. I guessed she was about 5'8" with long, reddish hair and striking green eyes. After talking with her for only 15 minutes, it was clear that she was not only beautiful but also very smart. However, Charlotte had a demeanor that made her seem quite confident and assertive. Overall, she came across as aloof. I left my meeting with Mr. Domino feeling good. They talked to me about a job that would involve me in their expansion plans. When I got home, I researched the First Century Bank in detail. I read everything I could find online and asked my financial advisor to gather more information about the company. I wanted to be ready in case I was called back for a second interview. I was genuinely interested in their expansion plans. A week later, Mr. Domino called to set up a second interview. He told me the job was practically mine, and the second interview was just a formality. I was disappointed when I found out that the second interview would be just with Charlotte. My unease grew when the meeting started. Charlotte began by saying that she did not want to hire me. I was too shocked to say anything other than, "I'm sorry to hear that." The 30 minutes with Charlotte were mostly spent with her explaining what I would not be doing. From there, things went downhill. She informed me that if I accepted the job, I would be working for her. She made it clear that she would expect high standards. I was taken aback and frustrated by her tone. "Look, I'm confused," I asked. "I thought I would just be the new person working on the expansion. Why would I report to the executive vice president?" "Because that's what my father wants," she replied sharply. "Okay," I said. "I don't care who I report to, but I still have a lot of questions about this job." "Unfortunately," Charlotte said while checking her watch, "I don't have more time to discuss it right now. Maybe we could have lunch or dinner sometime and talk about it more?" "No, I wouldn't be interested in that," Charlotte said, her eyes steady. "I don't form personal connections with employees. You should know that you are being offered this job because you are well known. All that is expected of you is to smile and greet people. If you can say something smart now and then, that would help." I was shocked by her arrogance and lack of respect. As Charlotte stood to leave, I got up. I was really angry and wanted nothing to do with her. "I don't know where you got the idea that you're better than everyone else," I said firmly. "And you should know that if you keep acting like this, it's not going to work out well for you." I then walked past her, but not before noticing the surprise on her face. As I left the building, I calmed down and started to laugh a little. Once I got into my car, I felt pretty good about myself. The interview had gone well, at least in my view. I had managed to get away from a really difficult boss. There was no way I was going to be treated poorly by her. I decided I needed to send out more job applications, but just when I thought I was done with Century First, they weren't done with me. Two things happened that changed my job search plans. The first was that Ray Sullivan was hired as the new head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I was really happy for him when I read about it. He was a great coach, and I knew he would do wonderful things for Tampa. The second thing was that Carl Domino came to my parents' house to talk to me. I was completely surprised when he showed up at our door. My parents were very impressed that the head of a big bank would come all this way to see their son. They were even more impressed when Carl asked them to join the conversation. After some light chat, Carl got to the point of his visit. "I want to apologize for my daughter's behavior, and Jason, I must say you handled her quite well. Telling her to change her attitude was clever." "Jason, you didn't really say that, did you?" my mother asked, shocked. My father found it funny, but tried not to show it. "Oh, he said that and more," Carl laughed. "But my daughter needed it. No one ever put her in her place, and it was about time." "Mr. Domino, I appreciate you coming to see me," I said, wanting to change the subject. "But I'm not interested in being a celebrity." "I wouldn't want that for you either," Carl laughed again. "But that's not the job I have in mind. I don't want to hire you just because you played in a Super Bowl. That's a nice bonus, but I did some research on you before our interview. I saw that you studied business and wrote a paper on franchising. The plan you suggested in that paper caught my attention. I think it could help my bank grow. I also noticed you took a course on banking rules. You won't just be a well-known person. After 6 months to a year of training, I want you involved in planning the bank's expansion." I was amazed by Carl's vision for my future at the bank, but I still had doubts. "Mr. Domino," I said carefully, "thank you for your confidence, but I'm not sure it will work out. I really don't think I can work with your daughter." This made Carl laugh heartily. "I must admit, having you report directly to Charlotte was not my best idea. My daughter works too much and hardly has a social life. I thought that having her work with someone as engaging as you might encourage her to consider forming new connections. But if you don't want to team up with her, you can talk directly to me." I considered Mr. Domino's offer for a moment. "As long as I don't have to work with your daughter, Mr. Domino, I'll take the job." However, my plan to work for Century First was not going to unfold as I expected. At one point, I even thought about quitting the bank. I was set to start at Century on the 1st of February. The idea was for me to spend a month in training at their office in Jacksonville, Florida. Then I would move through different departments for the next 5 months to learn as much as I could. After that, I would visit a few branches. Finally, I would go back to Jacksonville to help with growth plans. But as I said, things didn't go as expected. I started at Century First on the first day and quickly got to work to catch up. About a week into March, I received a call from Ray Sullivan. I couldn't understand why the coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers was reaching out to me. "Coach Sullivan, congratulations on your new role," I said as I sank into my couch. He chuckled. "Some people think moving up to head coach just means you're closer to being let go. If I don't do well, I'll be looking for another job. I really want to stay in this area, but you know how the NFL works." I laughed back. "Just do a good job and that should solve it." "That's the plan. Speaking of that, I'd like to know if you'd be interested in giving the NFL another chance. I want to offer you a contract with the Buccaneers." The offer surprised me. "I'm confused, Coach. You already have Donnie Taylor starting and Tyler Simmons as backup. Donnie is a solid quarterback and Tyler is a reliable backup. Donnie was a top draft pick a few years ago, and he had played well enough for the team to keep him on. Tyler was experienced, but not a starting player. I wasn't either." "I'm covering my bases," Coach Sullivan explained. "I've always believed you were a talented quarterback who didn't get the chance you deserved. You showed that in the Super Bowl when you almost led Buffalo to victory. I want to offer you a contract for $800,000, with $100,000 guaranteed. The rest will be guaranteed if you make the team, plus there are incentives based on how much you play and perform that could take it up to $2 million. What do you think? Are you interested?" "I'm not sure, Coach," I said carefully. "I just started a new job at Century First. It's a job that offers real chances for the future, and I can't just leave it behind." There was a brief silence before Coach Sullivan spoke. "I know Carl Domino from some charity work. Let me talk to him before you decide." After I agreed, I called my parents right away. I told my dad about the situation and asked for his advice. He put the phone on speaker so my mom could hear. "Jason, tell your mom about the offer from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers." I explained what Coach Sullivan had said. I mentioned that I had shared my new job with him and that he would talk to Mr. Domino. "Jason, I really don't think you should even consider that offer from Tampa Bay," my mom said firmly. "It sounds too good to be true. You have a great job with the bank. Don't risk losing it." I felt confused. I wanted another chance at the NFL, but I knew it might not work out. My mom was right that my job with Century First was a great opportunity. Still, I needed to hear what my dad thought. "What do you think, Dad?" "Well," he said slowly, "with all respect to your mother, I think she might be mistaken." "Harold, I heard my mom start to say something." "Susan, I listened to what you had to say, so I'd appreciate it if you could let me finish," my dad said. "As I was saying, I think your mother's wrong. This isn't about me wanting to say my son is a pro football player. Jason, I want you to think about how rare it is to have a chance like this. If you don't go for it, you'll always wonder if you could have made it. The things we regret the most are not our failures. We regret the chances we never took." I still didn't know what to do, but I realized I needed to talk to Mr. Domino before making a decision. Just then, I received a call. "Jason, I hear you have a tough choice to make," Carl said with a light laugh. "Yes, sir," I replied. "I assume you've spoken with Coach Sullivan." "I have, and I think we might have found a solution." That surprised me. I thought Carl would tell me to choose between a career at the bank or in football, but he didn't. "I'm not sure I understand, sir," I admitted. "Honestly, I still haven't made up my mind, but I will give you proper notice if I choose to play football." As you can guess, I was feeling confused and really thinking hard about what to do. "Coach Sullivan and I believe you can manage both." I didn't see this coming. "Both?" I asked. "Yes, we can work around your schedule," Carl explained. "Training camp doesn't start until August. You will need to attend some mini-camps first, but that shouldn't be a problem. We can adjust things for you and let you take a break during the season. During the off-season, you'll return to your job at the bank, and when your football career ends, you'll have a steady job waiting. I'll also have a dedicated worker. How does that sound to you?" It sounds great," I stumbled over my words. So I signed to play for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The news of my signing got only a small mention in the sports pages. No one seemed to notice except Charlotte. She was really upset that I was getting special treatment. I expected nothing less from her. But finally, I was getting another chance to play in the NFL. What I didn't know back then was that my personal life would get complicated again, and Jimmy would cause me problems once more. But eventually, I would find a way to get back at him. Being a player in the NFL seems amazing, and countless young men work hard to get there. But the truth is that less than 2,000 men will make it onto an NFL team in any season. So when the news was shared about my signing with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, my position at the bank changed. I was treated like I was something special, and I didn't like it. I hadn't made the team yet, and chances were, I might not. I finally sent out a message to my coworkers asking them to stop treating me differently. Thankfully, everyone took my request seriously and began to treat me like a regular employee, except Charlotte. She kept being rude. Since the minicamps were still a few months away, I stayed focused on my bank training. I also kept up with my daily runs and workouts. Of course, I had the Tampa playbook and studied it each night. Thankfully, I have a good memory. If I need to, I can learn a lot of the playbook in just one day. After all, there are only so many different plays. The names might change and some tasks differ, but most plays are pretty similar. Give me a few days and I can remember my duties as well as those of every other player on the offense. Then, the practice helps make it all stick. While most people at the corporate office were excited about my signing, Charlotte was not. She made it clear the first time we were alone together. "I don't get why my father thinks so highly of you," she said with a sneer. "If it were up to me, I would have sent you out the door. You might think you're important, but I want to remind you that I plan to keep a close eye on you every day you're here. I'm also going to try my best to get my father to reconsider your position." "And I thought you didn't like me," I replied, trying to sound innocent before walking away. When the NFL draft came around, I had already spent 2 months at Century First, and true to her word, Charlotte had really been keeping a close watch on me. Luckily, I reported to her father, and he didn't pay attention to her complaints or negative feedback. Eventually, he told her to stop writing me up unless something serious happened. The draft was very exciting. Coach Sullivan surprised everyone by trading Jerome Pittman, the middle linebacker from the Bucs, to the Cleveland Browns in exchange for their 2 second-round picks. Cleveland had the 10th and 16th picks in the second round. Jerome had been with Tampa for 7 years and had made the Pro Bowl 6 times. But he could be challenging to work with and had only 1 year left on his contract. Tampa would have to pay him around $15 million a year to keep him. As I often did during the NFL draft, I stayed glued to my television. I made a habit of watching the draft every year after my first season in the NFL. I wanted to see what my chances were of making a team. I analyzed each team's picks to see if they might need a backup quarterback. This year, I was especially interested in what the Buccaneers, led by Coach Sullivan, would decide. I wanted to see if I had a real chance of staying with Tampa. The Bucs had the 2nd pick in the draft, with only the Chicago Bears ahead of them. Everyone knew the Bears were looking to build a better offensive line and were focused on Joey Wagner, an offensive tackle from LSU. Joey had not allowed a sack while playing left tackle for the last 2 years. People were already saying he could be a Hall of Fame player in the future. Most experts believed that Tampa would pick Leonard Jackson, a talented quarterback from Alabama. Alabama had just won the national championship thanks to Leonard's strong performance. However, Coach Sullivan surprised everyone when he traded the 2nd pick to New Orleans. New Orleans had 2 first-round picks that year, the 10th and the 14th. To move up to the number 2 spot, the Saints gave the Bucs their first-round picks along with a second-round pick. Now, Tampa had 2 first-round picks and 3 second-round picks. Typically, first- and second-round picks could help teams right away. As the draft continued, Coach Sullivan kept surprising the experts. They all thought he would use one of those picks to choose a quarterback. Instead, Coach Sullivan focused only on defensive players with all the Bucs picks in the first 3 rounds. He picked several defensive players, including tackles, an end, a linebacker, a safety, and a cornerback. In the later rounds, he chose a mix of defensive and offensive players, but no quarterbacks. Many thought his choices were odd. When reporters asked him about it, he replied, "Defenses win championships." With Tampa not selecting a quarterback, I felt my chances of staying on the team had greatly improved. They might still trade for a quarterback, but I was hopeful about my position either way. As the minicamp approached, Charlotte's playful demeanor increased. I wasn't too worried about her because her father had a good handle on her. Still, it bothered me to think she had reservations about me. I couldn't understand what I had done to upset her. It was mid-May, just 2 days before my 10 days of organized team activities, OTAs, when I found myself in a serious situation. I had been working late and was leaving the building around 10 o'clock. As I walked to my car, I heard a scream. Not knowing what was happening, I rushed toward the sound. When I turned the corner of the building, I saw a man holding a woman down and trying to steal her belongings. He was also trying to quiet her. I ran faster and tackled him to the ground, landing on top of him. I quickly subdued him, and he stopped moving. When I stood up, he tried to grab my leg. I kicked him hard, and he curled up in pain. Then I called 911 for help. Breathing heavily, I turned to check on the woman and was shocked to find it was Charlotte. She was crying hard, and I could see marks on her face. I knelt down and wrapped my jacket around her. "Charlotte, it's okay," I said gently. "The police are on their way." She seemed disoriented, and when I tried to get up to call her father, she clung to me tightly. I managed to grab my phone and dial Carl's number. "Mr. Domino, it's Jason," I said quickly, while Charlotte cried in the background. "Someone just tried to attack your daughter. I've called the police and an ambulance." "Oh my God, no!" he shouted. "Is she hurt?" "The guy hit her before I could intervene. Right now she seems more scared than hurt." But I stopped him before he could do any more. "Thank God, Jason, thank God." He sounded relieved but quickly regained his composure. "Tell the ambulance to take her to the Mayo Clinic and please stay with her." "I will, sir," I replied, my voice shaky as the adrenaline began to fade. I was overwhelmed by everything that had just happened. My stomach felt uneasy, and my legs felt weak. The emergency medical team agreed that the Mayo Clinic was the closest hospital, so I rode in the ambulance with Charlotte. She held onto my arm tightly the whole way there, not letting go even when they wheeled her into the emergency room. Finally, a nurse gently got her to release my arm so the doctor could check on her. Carl showed up about 15 minutes later, looking very pale. Once Carl arrived, I called for a ride to take me back to my car. When I got home, I had a drink to calm my nerves and went to bed. The next morning, while I was shaving, I could see some small cuts and bruises on my face. One knuckle on my right hand was a bit swollen, and my left shoulder had some dark marks. But overall, I was okay. After my shower, I called the hospital and found out that Charlotte hadn't been admitted. That was good to hear, so I went to work. I called my assistant, Kelly, on my way to see if she had any updates about Charlotte. "The office has been in chaos since I got here," Kelly said quietly. "Security is everywhere, inside the building and outside in the parking lot. Mr. Domino is really upset with the security and maintenance staff. Is it true that someone attacked Miss Domino?" "Unfortunately, yes," I replied. "But Charlotte wasn't severely hurt. The attacker just hit her a few times." "How do you know all this? There are just rumors going around." "It's not important how I know," I said, not wanting to explain everything to Kelly. "Did you find the reports I needed?" "Yes, they're on your desk. Will you be in soon?" "If the traffic is good, I should be there in 10 minutes. When I walked through the front door, I was surprised to see Carl waiting for me. I reached out my hand to greet him, and he responded with a warm embrace. I stood there, a bit awkward. "How's Charlotte?" I asked right away. "She's really shaken up and her face is swollen, but she'll be okay," he said, looking relieved. "But I have to warn you, she's pretty upset with you." "That's not unusual," I replied with a smile. "I'll give her some space until she feels better." "That's not why she's upset," Carl said with a grin. "She's mad because you left last night before she could express her gratitude. Why don't you come over on Saturday? We're having a barbecue, and Charlotte will be with me until she's better." "Thanks for the invite," I said, feeling a bit uneasy. "But I'll be in training camp then." "Oh, right," Carl said, waving it off. "We can catch up when you get back. I just want you to know how grateful I am for what you did for my daughter. I haven't been sleeping well since the incident. I still have unsettling thoughts about what might have happened." I brushed off the concern with a weak comment and went to my office. While I was glad that Charlotte was okay, the whole situation was making me uneasy. I just wanted to finish the report I was working on so I could focus on the upcoming minicamp. Luckily, Carl kept the media out of the loop about what had happened. He said he wanted to protect his daughter from being upset any further. The training facility in Tampa was impressive and well-designed. I thought I did quite well during the 2 weeks of training, but most players look good when they are just in shorts and not hitting. The real challenge would come during training camp in August. Coach Sullivan was a great coach and treated all his players equally. Besides the physical training, I spent a lot of time in the film room with him and the other quarterbacks. There were 8 quarterbacks at that camp. Most of them were just there to help the main players practice. They were called camp arms, since they had little chance of making the team. They were there so the starters wouldn't overwork their arms. After meeting all the quarterbacks, I could only spot 2 who were truly camp arms. The rest had been backups in the NFL for different teams. Still, I felt good because I had a contract and had already been paid $100,000. But in the NFL, nothing can be taken for granted. Being a professional football player involves a lot of hard work, both on and off the field. When you weren't practicing, you were either in the weight room or reviewing film. And at night, you were studying the playbook. You needed to know every detail of each play. On my first day back at Century, Charlotte was very upset. Somehow, a report that needed to go with an application for 3 new branches hadn't been finished. If the report wasn't submitted today, the application could be delayed for months. That meant those branches would remain empty, and many of the staff hired for them would have to be paid, or the bank would risk losing their jobs. Charlotte had her team working hard to gather the missing information. I felt responsible when I realized what the report was. It had originally been my job to finish it. I couldn't complete it before heading to camp, so I had Carl pass it to Charlotte. Somewhere along the way, things fell through, and all the data I collected was lost. I quickly checked my hard drive and discovered I still had a backup. After downloading the necessary forms, I asked Kelly to put aside what she was doing so we could complete the report. By 4:30, we finished it. Kelly scanned it and sent the report to the Fed, with a hard copy going out by certified mail. I placed some copies in the office envelope and sent them to Carl and Charlotte before heading home. The next day, I was at my desk trying to catch up when Charlotte walked into my office and closed the door. I looked at her, but her face didn't show how she felt. I stood up, anticipating a stern conversation. Instead, Charlotte came over and embraced me warmly. Then she offered a gentle gesture of appreciation. When she pulled back, I asked, "What was that for?" "That's for saving my life 2 times, she replied. "Well, I get why you feel that way about the parking lot, but what about the other time?" I asked. "The report you sent yesterday?" "I don't think that really counts," I said with a grin, "but I'm not complaining." From that point on, Charlotte and I grew closer and built a strong working relationship. She opened up to me, sharing her feelings of shyness and insecurity. Her mother, Caroline, had left when she was just 5 years old. Charlotte's relationship with her mother was very troubled. One night at a gathering, it escalated into a loud argument. In the end, Charlotte accidentally damaged her mother's clothing. Caroline then filed a complaint against Charlotte and claimed emotional harm. Carl quickly sent his lawyers to support Charlotte. They not only defended her, but also took action against her mother. In the end, Carl's lawyers secured a video showing that Caroline had started the incident by throwing a drink at Charlotte. Because of this, the charges were dropped, and Charlotte won a $200,000 judgment against her mother. This event put significant strain on Caroline's marriage to her 3rd husband. Over the next few weeks, I learned that Charlotte was deeply affected by her mother's absence. She was very close to her father and wanted to make him proud. She often felt a sense of envy when he paid attention to others. One day during a meeting, Charlotte and I discussed a report I had completed for the Federal Reserve. It was a complicated report, typical for the government, where following instructions incorrectly could lead to fines. Thankfully, our accounting firm created worksheets that helped, although they were still tricky. "Jason, thank you for taking care of this report," she said with a smile. "I know it's not your main job, but I really appreciate your help." A couple of days later, I worked up the courage to ask Charlotte to dinner. I was happy when she not only said yes, but seemed excited that I had asked. As we spent time together, there was a quiet understanding between us. Her happiness made me feel more connected, and I cherished the moments we shared. Holding her close, she said, "I wish we could stay like this forever. I feel so safe and loved." "I feel the same," I replied gently, sharing a tender moment that deepened our bond. After we shared another cherished moment, Charlotte and I lay together, her resting on my chest. We talked for hours about our lives, both big and small. But when I mentioned I would leave in a couple of weeks for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers training camp, she started to cry. "Don't cry," I said softly. "Tampa's only about 200 miles away, just a 3-hour drive. I will come back to see you whenever I can, and you can come to see me too. Plus, there's a good chance Tampa might let me go." "I'm just worried that if you make the team, you might forget me," she said, tears in her eyes. "I know that women chase after football players." I chuckled. "I'm far from being a star. I haven't played much in the last 3 years, but I am falling in love with you." The next 2 weeks were busy for Charlotte and me. We spent almost every moment together, enjoying work, social activities, and our evenings. But soon, the day came for me to leave for camp. I felt torn about whether I wanted to make the team or not, but I knew it was time to pursue my NFL career. The Buccaneers training camp was just as tough as I remembered from my past experiences. I missed Charlotte deeply and felt down because the coach had said no wives or girlfriends were allowed at camp. The next 5 weeks were going to be hard. As the camp went on, Tampa made a surprising trade that worried me. They traded for quarterback Roger Stark, sending next year's second-round draft pick to Buffalo. After their Super Bowl run, Buffalo decided they needed to rebuild and started letting go of their high-paid players. This meant they could have more money and more draft picks. While I was happy to see Roger again, his arrival was unexpected. Tampa would likely keep only 3 quarterbacks, and his presence reduced my chances of staying on the team significantly. I thought about just coasting through camp and taking the $100,000 they would give me when they let me go. I had a job and Charlotte waiting for me in Jacksonville, but that wasn't how I was raised. I worked hard every practice because I truly wanted to make the team, but every day I felt like I was losing the fight. One day, after performing poorly, I felt really low. I walked into the locker room, wondering if I should just make it easy for Coach Sullivan and ask him to let me go. After my shower, I found out that Coach Sullivan wanted to talk to me. I thought he was going to tell me I was no longer needed because Roger joined the team. But that wasn't why the coach called me. He wanted to assure me that having Roger in camp didn't hurt my chances of making the team. I didn't quite believe him, but I decided to go along with it. "Jason, I really want you to know that you have a good chance to make this team," the coach said again. "I'm looking for someone who can stay calm under pressure. Roger has been doing that for 19 years, and I think you can too. I want you to show that strength this preseason." As camp went on, I wasn't shining like I hoped. Roger and Donnie were getting most of the playing time with the first team. By the first preseason game, Coach Sullivan had narrowed the quarterbacks down to 5, and I was one of them. I didn't get to play in the first game, but in the second game, I was on the field for the whole second quarter and part of the third. I threw for 97 yards and 1 touchdown, but I still wasn't impressing anyone. The last preseason game was when I really showed I belonged on the Bucs team. We were down 27-14 going into the fourth quarter. Donnie played the first quarter and threw 1 touchdown pass. The other score came when a running back from a lower division school broke through 3 tackles and ran 57 yards for a touchdown. Drew didn't score in the second quarter, and Phil Rankin couldn't do anything in the third quarter. I came in for the fourth quarter, but we had to punt on our first try. On our second chance, I led a 72-yard drive. I finished it off with a 7-yard throw to a tight end named Greg. I never learned his last name because he was let go the next day. We exchanged punts, and when we got the ball back, there were less than 3 minutes left. To keep it simple, we went 84 yards and scored when our fullback, Phil Tucker, powered through for a touchdown. We won 28-27. Still, I knew the sports headlines the next day would focus on Roger being the starter for Tampa. Coaches had until 5 p.m. the next day to finalize their roster to 53 players. Coach Sullivan let everyone know by 9 that night, and I had made the team. Now the rest of my salary was guaranteed. I was still only the third-string quarterback, but this year felt different. I headed back to Jacksonville as soon as I got the news from the coach. It was midnight when I got to Charlotte's house. I had a key but didn't want to startle her by walking in, so I rang the doorbell. It took 3 rings before Charlotte slowly came down the stairs with her phone in hand. She shouted happily when she saw me through the window and opened the door. We shared joyful moments on the stairs, in the hallway, and finally in the bedroom. Since I had to be back in Tampa by Monday morning, we only had that Sunday together. But Charlotte and I made the most of every minute. I realized I was truly in love with her. On my drive back to Tampa, I wondered if I really wanted to go back. But once I arrived at the practice field, those thoughts went away. As I expected, Roger was named the starting quarterback for Tampa, which upset Donnie. He made sure everyone knew he was unhappy. But in the first 4 games, Roger proved he still had it. We won all 4 games. This didn't stop Donnie from complaining. Eventually, Coach Sullivan had enough of Donnie's attitude and traded him to Seattle for a draft pick next year. Suddenly, I moved up from 3rd string to 2nd string quarterback. I was happy sitting on the sidelines during the games. I talked to Charlotte every night, and she would come down to Tampa every weekend we had home games. As far as I was concerned, life couldn't be better. Donnie was traded right after our 12th game, which we lost to Denver. Still, our record was 10-2. Even though I hadn't played yet, I was thrilled when Coach Sullivan gave us Monday and Tuesday off. Charlotte was already in town and had taken 2 personal days off work. I don't think I've ever been happier. We lost our next game but won the one after, with Roger leading us to victory in the last 2 minutes. Our record was now 11-3. We had already won our division and were playing for home field advantage in the playoffs. As the backup quarterback, I had few worries, and Charlotte was now coming to our away games too. But then, things took a turn. During our second-to-last game, Roger tried to run after being pressured. Some quarterbacks are good at this, but Roger wasn't the best. He knew to gain what yards he could and then go down to avoid getting hit. He had picked up 7 yards and was about to slide when his foot got caught on the turf. I heard a loud noise from the sidelines. Roger had hurt his knee. I watched with shock as they took Roger away on a cart. Then someone handed me my helmet. Suddenly, I realized I was now the quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I thought I was prepared each week for such a moment, but my mind and body weren't ready for the game. And because I was nervous, it turned into a tough situation. We lost the game 24-3. The media was harsh about how I played or didn't play well. I didn't score any touchdowns and threw 2 interceptions. One of those interceptions was returned for a touchdown. Even with my poor performance, Coach Sullivan got it worse. When we lost again the following week by just a field goal, the media started saying I should be replaced and said some terrible things about Coach Sullivan. Tampa brought in another quarterback, Tad Huntley, who had been let go by Detroit earlier that season. Right away, people started saying he should take my place as the starting quarterback, but Coach Sullivan stood by me. Even though we lost our last game of the season, we still kept the home advantage for the playoffs because Seattle lost their last game as well. That night and the next day, I finally realized how tricky the media could be. Since I had mostly been a backup quarterback, they hardly ever mentioned me. I could count the times I was talked about on my fingers. It hadn't bothered me before, but now they were questioning my skills and even my worth as a person. I understood why the media was hard on me. I hadn't played well, but I couldn't understand why they treated our coach so badly. He had taken a struggling team and led us to the playoffs. Now I saw why many players didn't trust the media. I was really nervous before our first playoff game, but it turned out I didn't need to be. The playoffs went better than I could have imagined. The New York Giants made the playoffs with a record of 8-9 and somehow beat the Green Bay Packers, but when they met us, we won easily, 48-3. I threw 3 touchdowns and ran for 1. Suddenly, the media had only good things to say about me. Next, we played against the Seattle Seahawks. They had the same record as us, but many thought they were a stronger team. In the NFC Championship game, they struggled, and we won 38-13. I threw for 347 yards and had 2 touchdowns. Now, it was time for the Super Bowl. The 2 weeks between winning the NFC and the Super Bowl were chaotic. Everyone wanted to talk to you, and I hardly had any time alone. Still, I managed to spend some time with Charlotte, and those moments helped me stay focused. When Super Bowl day arrived, we played against the Baltimore Ravens, who had the best record that year at 16-1. They were also favored to win by 8 points, reflecting the confidence everyone had in them. But that didn't happen. For excitement, this Super Bowl wasn't thrilling unless you were a Tampa Bay fan. We dominated the Ravens, winning 35-14. I threw for a touchdown and ran one in. That night was one of the happiest of my life. I had just been part of the team that won the Super Bowl, and now I was contentedly resting beside the woman I loved. The next few weeks felt like a big event, but thankfully, Carl had given Charlotte a lot of time off to be with me. The first 2 weeks were amazing as I went from one event to another, and people were excited to see me. However, by the third week, I noticed that Charlotte was getting upset. It started to bother her that many women were paying a lot of attention to me. I had dealt with that kind of attention when I first joined the league, so it frustrated me too, but I remained polite and kept my distance. Charlotte, on the other hand, was having a tough time with it, and I could see it was making her unhappy. When I noticed how unhappy Charlotte was, I wanted to leave this big event. Honestly, I just wanted to go back to my normal life and my job at the bank. So, I talked to my agent, Jack Starmer, and told him I wanted to stop going to these events. Jack was not thrilled because I was getting paid for most of these events, and he earned a cut from that. But I stood my ground, and Jack finally agreed to end the long tour. Still, there were 2 events I couldn't cancel, a contract for a shaving cream commercial and a visit to a children's hospital. I told Charlotte that I was done with the tour and suggested she fly back to Jacksonville. I planned to join her a week later after I finished my commitments. I was happy we won the Super Bowl, but I didn't enjoy the celebrity that came with it. I really didn't understand why anyone would want to be famous. To ease Charlotte's worries, I had planned to ask her to marry me when we got back to Jacksonville after the tour. On her last night before heading home, I took her to a nice restaurant. After she sat down, I knelt before her and proposed. She was silent for about 5 seconds. At first, I thought she might not want to marry me, and I began to panic. But finally, Charlotte said softly, "Really? You want to marry me?" with tears in her eyes. "I want to marry you more than anything in the world," I said as I got up and embraced her gently. "Oh my goodness, Jason, I love you so much," she replied, her voice shaking. "Yes, I will marry you." After I slipped the ring onto her finger, the people in the restaurant cheered. When the applause faded, the staff brought us a bottle of sparkling juice and served us a delicious dinner. Later that night in our room, Charlotte was so joyful. We spent a wonderful night together, talking and enjoying each other's company. A few hours later, she caught her flight back to Jacksonville. The commercial shoot turned out to be challenging as I struggled with my lines. I also had some trouble working with the woman in the commercial alongside me. She just couldn't accept that no meant no. One time, when I was getting ready in a trailer, she came in, and to my surprise was very forward. I had to politely ask her to leave the trailer. Going to the children's hospital made up for that frustrating moment. I was meant to stay for just an hour, but I ended up there for 6 hours. I talked with many kids who wanted to chat. Hearing about their illnesses was heartbreaking. It was hard not to feel moved when you learned about their struggles. I promised to come back for their fundraiser the next year, and I really did. There was another surprise waiting for me, too. When I went to one of the upper floors, I saw Tabor by the elevator. He looked almost the same as in high school, but seemed really nervous. "Jason, can I talk to you for a moment?" he asked, holding out his hand. I smiled at my old friend and gave him a hug. "Hey, great to see you, Tabor. Are you still with Gina?" He shifted his feet and looked more anxious. Yeah, we got married." "Congratulations. That's wonderful," I said, stepping back. "What can I do for you?" "Well, we have a little boy, TJ, and he's not well." "Is it serious?" I asked, knowing he was in the hospital. "He has cancer," Tabor said softly, then added, "but we're hopeful that the treatments will help him." "I'm really sorry to hear that. What can I do to help?" "Since I told TJ that I played football with you in high school, he thinks you're his favorite player. If it's not too much trouble, could you visit him and maybe give him an autograph?" "I'd love to do that. Just give me 10 minutes. 10 minutes later, I showed up at TJ's room with a baseball cap, a football, and a jersey. I peeked inside to make sure I was in the right place and saw Gina beside a thin boy with no hair and the saddest eyes. Tabor stood behind her, looking tired. "Hi," I said cheerfully. "I hear someone in here named TJ is a big football fan." TJ's face lit up and he tried to sit up. Gina helped him sit up straight as I took a chair next to him. "I hear you're my #1 fan, so I brought you some gifts. Hope you like them." I signed the cap and the ball for him, calling him my #1 fan. His smile warmed my heart but made me feel sad. Why did kids like TJ have to go through so much? Did my dad really play football with you? TJ asked shyly. Not only did we play together, but your dad was the best running back I ever knew. If he hadn't been hurt, I believe he would have made it to the NFL. Really? He asked, then glanced at his father. For the first time that day, Tabor smiled. Definitely, I replied. Now I have a plan for you. I want to take you, your mom, and your dad to a football game. I also want to bring you into the locker room to meet some players. But for that to happen, you need to get better. Do you think you can do that? TJ nodded enthusiastically, his smile getting bigger. I'm going to write our agreement on this jersey so you know it's true. I wrote, I promise to take TJ and his mom and dad to a professional football game once he gets better, and then I signed it. TJ hugged the jersey tightly as I glanced at my watch. My agent was signaling that I was going to miss my flight if I didn't hurry. I'm sorry to end our visit so soon, but I've got to catch a flight, I said as I pulled out my notebook. I wrote down my cell phone number and asked Tabor for his. Let's stay in touch, I said, handing him my number. Just before I left, Gina offered her heartfelt gratitude. I can't thank you enough, she said, tears in her eyes. This is the first time TJ has smiled in months. I nodded and then headed out. I took an overnight flight back to Jacksonville, arriving at 6 in the morning. I ordered a ride to my condo, took a shower, and changed before heading to the bank. I got there just after 7. It was mostly quiet, except for a few security staff. I rushed to my office and started going through the papers that had piled up while I was gone. Even though it wasn't urgent since everyone knew I was away, I thought it would help me catch up. At 8, Kelly peeked into my office and squealed when she saw me at my desk. She gave me a big hug and welcomed me back. It felt nice to be back at work where I could just be myself. But my moment of peace was short-lived. A little before 9, I was called to meet Carl in the server room. I figured it was about the 12 branches we had just acquired before I left for the football season. Their computer system didn't work with ours. I knew Carl wanted to upgrade our whole system rather than just fix the new branches. I thought I would be briefed on the updates, but that wasn't what Carl wanted to discuss. When I got off the elevator on the ground floor, I noticed the lobby was packed. As soon as people saw me, they cheered. A security guard led me to the center of the lobby where Charlotte and her father were waiting for me. The place was filled with hundreds of people, with even more looking down from the upper floors. There were also many people gathered outside the building. Reporters and cameramen were there from every local news station. As I walked towards my smiling fiancé and Carl, I saw a big cake shaped like the Super Bowl trophy. My ears felt warm, and the cheering didn't stop until Carl raised his hands. Jason, welcome home, Carl said as he shook my hand. The crowd cheered again, and Carl let them cheer for a moment before raising his hands again. I think Jason thought he could sneak in without anyone noticing, Carl joked, making everyone laugh. That wasn't going to happen. I've been tracking your travel plans for days, and I had people keeping me updated all the way back. This got more laughs, and I felt really embarrassed. I just stood there with a silly smile on my face. Jason, we organized this celebration to show how proud we are of what you achieved this past football season. I also have a couple of important announcements. The first might seem like it's connected to the Super Bowl win, but it was decided long before this season. We just waited for Jason to come back. As of today, Jason is now the Southern Sector Marketing Supervisor. The crowd clapped loudly, but Carl quickly hushed them. The next announcement may feel like old news, but I want to make it official. Jason has asked my daughter Charlotte to marry him, and she has said yes. They will be married in June. Right after Carl's announcement, I pulled Charlotte close, sharing a warm moment together. I wasn't sure if the loud cheer came from the crowd or the excitement in my head. From that point on, Charlotte and her dad took over planning the wedding. At first, they asked for my input, but soon they realized I wasn't much help with wedding details. So they decided to let my mom take charge. She was very happy about it. I went with them to the country club to talk about the reception. I insisted on joining them at different bakeries to try wedding cakes, but aside from getting fitted for my tuxedo, my main role in the wedding was just to show up on time. Then there was the bachelor party. I started hearing whispers that my teammates wanted to throw me an amazing party. Knowing some of their ideas, I politely said no. Instead, I planned to have about 30 friends and teammates join me at Kobe House, the best steak restaurant in Florida. Yet my idea of a bachelor party and the wedding plans never came together as I thought they would. I didn't realize it at the time, but later I would find out that Jimmy had tricked me again. About 2 weeks before the wedding, I had to stay late at work to finish paperwork for 16 new branches in Virginia and Maryland. It needed to be perfect because it was due the next day. I was tired when I finally got home to my condo. However, as soon as I stepped inside, I felt something was wrong. It was easy to see with all our pictures on the floor, broken. Worried that someone had entered my home and scared that Charlotte might have been involved, I rushed from room to room calling her name. When I got to our bedroom, I was shocked. Charlotte was not there, and none of her things were around. On the bed was a big envelope with her engagement ring on top. On the envelope, Charlotte had written, "You bastard." Inside, there was a colored photo of an actress from a commercial with me in an intimate moment. I was furious. Someone had set me up. At first, I thought it might be Jimmy, but I dismissed that idea. But later, after reading a private investigator's report, I found out that Jimmy had been involved with the actress and had planned this. Right then, though, all I wanted was to talk to Charlotte. I needed to explain that it was a misunderstanding and nothing had happened. I called her cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message asking her to call me back. Next, I tried her home phone, but that went to her voice recorder, too. So I called Carl as a last resort. He answered right away. "Mr. Domino," I said, worried. "Someone sent Charlotte a picture that makes me look bad. I promise nothing happened. I need to clear this up with her." "Jason," Carl replied with a serious tone, "I wish I could help, but Charlotte made it clear that she never wants to talk to you again. She asked me to transfer her to New York, and I did. She also asked me not to share her contact details with you." I was heartbroken by this news, but New York puzzled me. I thought we didn't have any branches there. Those plans were at least a few years away. "New York?" I questioned, confused. "We don't have anything there." "It was something Charlotte and I talked about while you were away," Carl explained. "I thought we could start on that in a couple of years. I want to begin offering financial planning services at our locations. Charlotte has taken a job at a financial firm to learn more about it. And sorry, but I won't tell you which one." "Jason, I'm really sorry, but I have to respect my daughter's wishes." I was in shock after hanging up with Carl. In an instant, my life had turned upside down. I tried calling Charlotte's phone for 2 more hours before I finally gave up. I went to bed but only managed to sleep for an hour or two. I felt terrible the next morning, but I knew I had to take action. When I got to the office, I walked straight to Carl's office and they let me in right away. He looked as worn out as I felt. I handed him my resignation. "I'm sorry, Mr. Domino, but with everything that's happened, I just can't continue working here. I can work for 2 weeks if you need me, but I'd really prefer to leave right away." "After our talk last night, I worried this would happen," Carl said, taking my resignation like it was something negative. "I wish you would think it over. Give Charlotte some time to cool down. You two can talk it out later. She's just so upset right now that she isn't being reasonable. I know you are hurting just as much. Just wait a few months." I shook my head. "I can't do that, Carl. I didn't do anything wrong, and Charlotte won't even let me explain. If she feels this way even before we are married, I see no future for us. I won't be with someone who doesn't trust me." "What happened, Jason?" Carl asked gently. "Nothing happened, Carl. Absolutely nothing," I replied, feeling frustrated. "I was set up. I went into the bathroom for a moment, and that actress sneaked into the trailer and acted inappropriately. If someone took a picture through the window, it didn't show what really happened." "Jason, it's sad to say, but Charlotte might be making a big mistake. That said, I won't accept your resignation. I'm putting you on unpaid leave. If you ever want your job back, it's yours." It felt like the only person benefiting from my situation was my agent, Jack. He quickly started booking me for more appearances since I was in the spotlight. He even got me scheduled for another tour. He set me up to be on Late Show with Stephen Colbert, who has a reputation for being tough. Colbert kicked off the interview with some comment about Tampa having a great team because I was their quarterback. I agreed, but his smug attitude annoyed me, so I shot back, Do they really pay you to say things like that? The conversation went downhill from that point. As we left NBC, Jack confronted me about how I handled it, and I told him that if he didn't like what I said, he could keep quiet. He quieted down right away and apologized. I realized that I had let Colbert get to me and was ready for some trouble to come my way. Instead, I got a lot of letters from Tampa fans who were happy with how I stood up for their team. Colbert, on the other hand, received a lot of hate mail from across the country. To make things even better, a few nights later, Colbert had to say sorry to me publicly and invite me back on his show, but I had no intention of going back there. One good thing that came from the mess with Colbert was that it helped me think clearer about Charlotte. She had made her choice, and it was time for both of us to move on. I tried dating whenever I could. Being an NFL quarterback certainly made things easier in that area. Gradually, the pain began to lessen. Still, I knew a part of me would always care for Charlotte. I was sitting in my condo, pondering my future. It seemed logical that Tampa would want to keep me. This time, however, I wanted more than the $1.4 million they paid me last season. Later that day, my phone rang, and I saw it was from the Buccaneers office. I thought it would be about my contract. As I answered, I was debating whether to ask for $10 or $12 million. Instead, I got a shocking surprise. When I said hello, I was surprised to hear it was Coach Sullivan. I expected General Manager Scott Donaldson to be on the other end, but what Coach Sullivan told me made my world feel a bit heavy. "Jason, this is Coach Sullivan," he said firmly. "This is one of the toughest calls I've ever had to make. Management has decided not to keep you. They traded our first, second, and third-round draft picks this year, plus our first and second-round picks for next year to secure the top pick in the draft. Even though I don't agree with this decision, they are going to draft Terry Lohman, the quarterback from LSU." I was stunned and could only reply, "Wow, that's not what I expected. I guess it's true what they say about the NFL. It's a quick game. Thanks for telling me personally. Jason, I'm truly sorry about this. If it helps at all, I fought hard to keep you, and I'll try to find a way to bring you back. You are a talented quarterback, and I'm sure another team will want you." But Coach Sullivan was mistaken. In an unusual turn of events in the NFL, no teams seemed to be looking for a quarterback. After the last preseason game, it felt like my NFL career was over. Even my agent thought so. By the time the first game of the season arrived, I was feeling really down. I had lost my fiancée and my chance in the NFL. To make things worse, I had left my job at the bank. I tried dating to help with the loneliness, but I found the conversations to be lacking depth and connection. At the start of my career, things were enjoyable, but now, not so much. I reached out to my dad for advice, but all he suggested was that I go back to my old job at the bank. I just couldn't bring myself to do that. For the first 3 weeks of the season, I read the injury reports after each game. Whenever a quarterback got hurt, I anxiously waited for my phone to ring, but it never did. I felt down and confused about what to do next. Without a job, I started to feel a bit worried, so I scheduled a meeting with my financial advisor. Brian Bright had been taking care of my investments since I joined the NFL. I appreciated his advice, plus he was easy to talk to. What I really wanted was to feel confident that my finances were all right. Since I didn't have a job, I would need to rely on my investments until I found something new. When Brian checked my portfolio, he showed me that I had around $5.5 million in stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. Most of the bonds and funds were tax-free. I could expect to make between $150,000 and $200,000 each year. I had a sense of that already, but hearing Brian confirm it made me feel better. As I was leaving Brian's office, I thought I heard someone calling my name. I looked around but didn't see anyone, so I started walking toward the crosswalk. Then I heard my name again, louder this time. When I turned, I was surprised to see Stacy running to catch up with me. She looked great. "Jason, I thought I wouldn't be able to catch you," she said, trying to breathe normally. "How about we step into this grill for a drink? You can catch your breath and we can chat," I suggested, leading her inside. "So, how are you and Jimmy doing?" I asked, trying to hide my curiosity when I mentioned his name. Stacy rolled her eyes. "Jimmy is not in my good books right now." "Really? I thought you two were engaged?" "He did propose, and we were engaged for a little while. I said yes because the guy I cared about had left me. But Jimmy can be really difficult sometimes," she admitted, a slight blush appearing on her cheeks. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. You both played football together in high school. Yeah, we did, but we weren't close friends, I replied with a smile. Honestly, I always thought he was a bit rude. But why do you think he's difficult? Because he got really upset when I said I didn't want to get married. Plus, he always complains that nobody values him as a football player. I watched Stacy for a moment. She looked the same, but even better. I wondered if there could still be something between us, so I decided to ask her. So, what have you been up to in the last few years? I teach elementary school here in Tampa and keep an eye on a certain quarterback from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Teaching sounds cool, I replied with a smile, but the other part sounds a bit dull, especially now. I just got let go by Tampa. They want to draft a new star quarterback from LSU. Stacy looked confused for a moment, but then her smile returned. I think that's the most interesting part of my life. As for Tampa making a mistake, I think they're not thinking straight. You just helped them win a Super Bowl. We chatted for a bit about her job and my future. When there was a pause in the conversation, Stacy touched my arm. Why did you leave me at the draft party? Because you were with Jimmy, and he has a way of complicating my love life. I thought we were starting to connect, but then I realized you were with him. I thought it was best to step back. I wasn't really with Jimmy then, Stacy said, making air quotes. But he liked to act like it. To me, we were just friends. Later, in a moment of weakness, we got engaged briefly. But I got tired of hearing him complain about how no one appreciated him. Besides, I still care about you. After Jimmy and I broke up, I moved to Tampa. When you left me at FSU, I was beginning to have feelings for you, and then you disappeared. Hearing that Stacy had feelings for me made my heart race. Suddenly, my messy life didn't feel so heavy. Getting cut by Tampa didn't sting as much, and losing Charlotte didn't hurt as deeply. I invited her to dinner that night, hoping to rekindle our friendship. It was like we were back at Florida State, just two friends chatting like we had seen each other yesterday. We dated over the next 2 weeks, and I started to feel affection for Stacy again. Still, I had thoughts of Charlotte lingering in my mind, but I tried to keep those feelings tucked away. Then my situation improved. I got a call from Detroit. Their quarterback, Barry Stand, had hurt his knee and would be out for 4 weeks. Their backup, Ty Wilson, was expected to step up, so I was signed as a backup. Detroit offered me an $800,000 contract that wasn't guaranteed. I picked up their game plan quickly, but I never played. I watched from the bench for 4 weeks while the Lions struggled with a 1-3 record. As soon as Barry was back, I was let go. While I was in Detroit, I made a lot of calls to Stacy. After she went to bed at night, I sent her thoughtful emails. After getting cut from Detroit, I made my way back to Tampa. I only got to spend a week with Stacy before I received a call from the Carolina Panthers. Both of their quarterbacks, Phil Parker and Jeff Hoffman, were hurt, so they wanted me on standby. Carolina had a strong team, and it seemed like they could make it to the playoffs. When Phil and Jeff were back to full health, I thought I would be let go, but the Panthers kept me. During the first playoff game, I got to play the last half of the fourth quarter. Carolina was already ahead 49-3 when they took Phil out. Jeff played for a bit before he hurt his throwing hand, which meant it was my turn. All I needed to do was take care of the ball, and I did just that. I moved the team down the field and scored a touchdown from the 16-yard line. The final score was 56-3. Sadly, the Panthers lost to the Packers the following week, and I was let go the next day. I asked Stacy to marry me at a New Year's Eve party, and I was over the moon when she said yes. The ceremony took place at my parents' house with about 60 friends, family members, and former teammates. Stacy and I hadn't been together long, but we felt a deep connection. During our honeymoon, we talked about our future together when we weren't simply enjoying each other's company. I had no idea what the next season would hold, but with Stacy by my side, I felt confident. The off-season felt like a dream. I had only a few public events to attend, but I brought Stacy along every time. She looked amazed by everything, like a child. No matter where we went, Stacy could easily charm the people around her. She loved meeting new folks, but she always checked back to see where I was. If she felt tired or uneasy, she'd come back to me with a big smile. If someone tried to get too friendly, she would hurry back to my side, a spark of delight in her eyes. And if I noticed anyone getting too close to her, I would make my way over as well. The first 2 years felt magical. I was deeply in love with Stacy, and I believed she felt the same. Our bond was strong, but my NFL career was still uncertain. As a backup quarterback, I couldn't rely on anything. Yet, each new season seemed to offer another chance. In our first year of marriage, I played in San Francisco. However, I didn't enjoy it there, even more than in New York. The people on the West Coast were very different, and I found San Francisco to be quite messy. Still, I shouldn't complain since the 49 ERs were paying me $1 million, even if I mostly sat on the bench. I did get to play in 7 games, but I never started one. Stacy had a totally different view of San Francisco. She loved the city, appreciating its unique charm and vibrancy. Stacy loved the gatherings we attended and admired the engaging people there. She also enjoyed visiting the wine country. Meanwhile, I had to travel to some of the city's rougher neighborhoods. It was a rule for our team that all players had to go to the poorer areas to show support for the community. We had a set schedule, and I probably went out 3 or 4 times. However, I noticed that San Francisco was struggling. The city leaders hadn't done much to help, and it seemed filled with challenges like crime and homelessness. It was alarming to read in the papers about how much mess was being cleaned off the streets daily, as if this was something to celebrate. Although the team wanted to help, the visits didn't really make a difference. Our football team was one of the most socially aware in the NFL. Colin Kaepernick started the practice of kneeling during the national anthem to protest the issues facing the community. I decided to look into it and found some statistics that showed about 1,000 people were killed by police each year in the U.S. Of those, around 200 were black. It was clear that black individuals were more often killed by others in their community. This made me question the purpose of the protest, so I didn't join in. After a tough game, a teammate named Ronnie Lufton confronted me. He accused me of being unsupportive for not participating in the kneeling. The locker room grew tense and silent. Ronnie, while not a prominent player, was very passionate about his views. Since many of our teammates were black, I wanted to avoid a confrontation about race. What frustrated me the most was that many players didn't truly understand the reasons behind the kneeling. Most were just following the crowd. I didn't want to take sides in this disagreement, so I tried to ease the tension. "Ronnie," I said with a friendly smile, "I get that there are important feelings on both sides. The black community has valid reasons for being wary of the police after years of being treated unfairly. Many haven't done anything wrong except be in the wrong place at the wrong time. I also understand that police can feel fear and uncertainty when dealing with suspects in high-crime areas. Can you tell me, Ronnie, how many black men were killed by police last year?" "Thousands," he responded angrily. "You're way off," I said gently. "According to the statistics, police killed 217 black men last year. According to reports from the Washington Post and New York Times, 95% of those shootings were seen as justified." "What are you talking about?" Ronnie was visibly upset. "Are you really defending the police?" "I'm not defending anyone," I replied, feeling frustrated. "I'm just trying to explain what's really happening. Also, I think kneeling during the national anthem is unfair to the most important people, our fans. The national anthem isn't about the president, Congress, or any political group. It stands for the American people. When you disrespect them, you insult those who support us. If you want to advocate for unfair treatment of black individuals, you should do it in front of the White House or Congress where real change can happen." Ronnie scanned the locker room and saw no one agreeing with him, so he walked away but had to say one last thing. "You're still unsupportive," he called out. I ignored him, and the conversation ended there. I found it interesting how the whole movement seemed to fade away when TV networks stopped showing players kneeling. Without the visibility, players quickly lost interest. The networks ceased coverage because it was affecting their profits. Once the season ended and San Francisco did not make the playoffs, I was released. I expected it and honestly felt relieved. Just like in New York, I wanted nothing more to do with San Francisco. During the offseason, the starting quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles, Aaron Wright, hurt his Achilles tendon badly. He had played in the league for 5 years before finding a place with the Eagles. In his first year, he led them to the Super Bowl. They lost, but he received a big 5-year contract worth $120 million. He had a winning record in 4 out of 5 of his seasons with the team, but they never made it back to the Super Bowl. Last year, the Eagles drafted Wayne Tolbert from Stanford, who was expected to be their future quarterback. When Aaron learned his injury needed surgery, he announced he was retiring. That same day, Philadelphia signed me to be Wayne's backup. After my experience in San Francisco, my partner Stacy wasn't excited about moving to Philadelphia, and she let me know. I reminded her that I didn't have a choice since San Francisco had let me go, so we were headed to Philadelphia. However, I was worried about her reactions. For a rare change, I had the entire off-season to learn the playbook. I headed to training camp feeling as prepared as I could. But I knew the coaches were focused on Wayne as the starter. That didn't surprise me, but I would be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed. As the camp went on, I noticed two things. Wayne had a lot of talent, but he wasn't quite ready. He had a strong arm and threw accurately, but there were problems with his throwing motion, and he didn't know how to read the defense well. Plus, his footwork needed improvement. Wayne helped the team score a touchdown in the first quarter of the first preseason game. I played in the second quarter and led the team to 2 field goals. The third quarter was rough with 2 other quarterbacks I can't remember, and they didn't play well enough to stay on the team. In the fourth quarter, a young player named Garrison Williams from Grambling State took the field. He didn't have the strongest arm, but he was fast. He managed to run around and score the winning touchdown. Garrison was let go after the second preseason game but ended up in San Francisco. I hope he has a better experience there than I did. We finished the preseason with only that first win, but the team showed promise. However, in the first regular season game, Wayne's weaknesses became clear. We were 0-3 after the first 3 games. During practice, the quarterback coach and I worked with Wayne, and he was slowly improving. But before the 4th game, it was announced that I would be starting. I was excited, but Wayne was really upset. After practice, he expressed his concerns to me. I tried to set him straight. "Wayne, you're thinking like someone who's frustrated," I said firmly. "The NFL is a business. It's all about making money. Just like any job, if you can't help the team, you won't be here long. You won't be the starting quarterback this Sunday, so you need to focus on becoming a great player instead of feeling sorry for yourself. You have a lot of talent. Use it." I left Wayne in the locker room to think about what I had said. When I got home, I wanted to tell Stacy I would be starting this Sunday, but she wasn't there. All I found was a note saying she had gone out with some of the other players' wives. She mentioned, "These are the wives of starting players." That last part bothered me. At first I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, thinking she didn't mean anything by it. But when she came home 4 hours later, I got worried. It wasn't just that she had been drinking, it was also how she was dressed. I helped her to bed, planning to have a serious talk with her in the morning, knowing she realized she made a mistake. She came down the stairs looking nervous, like a young girl who had just been called into the principal's office. We talked, and Stacy said she was sorry. Her reason was that she wanted the other wives to like her, so she had a bit too much to drink. That night after practice, we talked again, and it went well. Stacy finally got that I was going to be the starting quarterback for the game on Sunday. After that, things settled into a new kind of routine. We won our next 3 games, but lost the 4th one by just 1 point, finishing at 34-31. When you score 31 points, you expect to win, but our defense didn't perform that day. I wouldn't say that out loud, though. The following week, the coach announced that Wayne would start at quarterback for the next game. They explained that I had a hurt calf and needed to rest. I did have an injury, but so did most of the team. That's how it goes in professional football. They also said I could play if needed. I got it. The team had invested a lot in Wayne, and they wanted to see their money in action. I was just the temporary guy until Wayne really stepped up. I understood my role, but Stacy seemed confused. I realized that my position as starting quarterback gave her a boost in status among the other wives. This made me feel uncomfortable. "What if Wayne takes the starting job? What then?" she asked sharply one day. "I'll do what I've always done," I replied, looking at her seriously. "I'll work hard to help the team win." I saw a moment of realization on Stacy's face. She understood she had crossed a line. "I'm sorry," she said, giving me a hug. "You've worked so hard and it feels like they want to push you aside." As an NFL quarterback, you learn to notice the small things. I could tell something was different with Stacy now. From that moment on, I would pay closer attention. But soon, everything seemed to go back to normal, and Stacy was my caring wife again. Wayne played well on Sunday, but luck was not on his side. In the third quarter, while we were ahead 17-10, Wayne hurt his throwing hand when he accidentally hit it on another player's helmet. He broke his thumb badly and needed surgery on it, ending his season. As the last week of the season approached, we had to beat Cincinnati, and the Giants and Bears had to lose for us to make the playoffs. To my surprise, all three of those things happened, and we barely made it in. Our fans were overjoyed, but no one expected us to go far. At that moment, I was really happy. But soon my life was about to change in a big way. But it would take almost a year to realize that my life had taken a turn for the worse. At first, things were going well between Stacy and me. Then, something happened that started our trouble. Before our first playoff game, a local TV station decided to make a pre-game show featuring some of the wives of the Eagles players. Stacy was chosen because I was the starting quarterback. The show became very popular, and Stacy shone in the spotlight. She was funny and warm, sharing charming stories about our life together. The audience really liked her. After we won our first game against San Francisco 25-14, the station decided to do another show with the wives. They picked different wives this time, but kept Stacy. The idea was to help women who didn't know much about football understand the game better. The show was a hit, especially with female viewers. Next, we faced Dallas, who were expected to win the Super Bowl. They had a strong record of 15-2 during the regular season. However, we stunned everyone by beating them 44-17, exciting Eagles fans everywhere. Everyone was talking about the Super Bowl, but I knew we still had a long way to go. We had to play New Orleans next, who had already beaten us decisively earlier in the season. Stacy's next show received even higher ratings than the first two combined. She was elated, and I was genuinely happy for her. But things took a downturn when we lost a tough game in overtime, 24-21. What happened afterwards surprised and hurt me. I was already feeling bad about the loss, but Stacy seemed to blame me for it. She kept making little comments about my mistakes. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, and we had a big argument. When I refused to sleep in the guest room, Stacy decided to go to her parents' house. A few days later, I got a call from Stacy's mother, Linda. She wanted to know why Stacy was in her old bedroom so upset. I tried to explain our argument, although I couldn't understand why Stacy turned against me after the NFL championship game. I should have listened more to Linda. She was worried about her daughter's behavior and thought I needed to be more assertive. Linda shared that when Stacy was younger, she could be self-centered and got bored easily with her friends. Now that she was married, Linda was disappointed to see that attitude return. Meanwhile, I was struggling with the biggest argument in our marriage. I missed Stacy so much that it felt like a real ache in my heart. I wanted her to come back home. To my relief, Stacy returned the next day, full of apologies. She explained that she had been acting unpleasantly because she wanted to do one more TV show, and after our loss, that chance was lost. According to Stacy, she had enjoyed her time in the spotlight, wanting a little more. While she apologized with tears, life returned to normal for a short while. But I soon realized that things had changed in our relationship. The TV team at CBS was impressed with Stacy's 3 shows. Many women had watched and loved them. They wanted to talk to Stacy about making the show a bigger deal, featuring the wives of different sports teams each week. Their plan was to air it an hour before the pregame show. They invited Stacy to New York for more discussions. I had other commitments, so I couldn't go with her, and I sensed she was okay with that. A week later, the news broke that Stacy would host the show for the next year. That seemed fine until I saw a picture in the paper. Stacy was there with the TV team and some players from the New York Giants, including Jimmy Washington. I wasn't happy about this, but Stacy explained everything clearly. She said that the Giants had just signed Jimmy to a very big contract, and since he was in the news, they invited him to the announcement with a few other new players. Jimmy had changed his position last season and had even made it to a notable sports event. Stacy was offered a contract worth $500,000 to cover all the games that year, 3 preseason and 17 regular season games. She had to travel to New York every month for meetings. At first, Stacy would take a morning train and return by early afternoon. Then she decided she wanted to stay overnight and enjoy the city. I offered to go with her, but as training camp began, she still wanted to stay. This led to a big disagreement, and she was unhappy when I said no. Meanwhile, the Eagles decided to keep me for another season, even though I knew they planned to start Wayne. I didn't mind much, as I still had a job for another year. They signed me for $1 million, but there were bonuses in the contract that could let me earn up to $5 million, depending on how well I played as a quarterback. I didn't think I would earn any extra money because Wayne was ready to play, so I mostly stayed on the sidelines and watched for the rest of the season. Sometimes I got to play when the game was already decided. I should have felt upset, but I didn't. I had accepted my role in the NFL long ago. However, I couldn't accept my wife's new attitude or the way she treated me. As Stacy's show grew more popular, our marriage started to feel strained. The only good thing in my life was that the Eagles were in the playoffs, but I wasn't really part of their success. I could sum up my contribution to one play. Wayne got hurt and sat out for a moment. I completed a long pass that put us close to the other team's end zone. When Wayne returned, he couldn't get us any closer, so we kicked a field goal, winning the game by 2 points. By the time the last game of the regular season came, Stacy was hardly ever home. When she was, we barely spoke, and she slept in the guest room. I was very upset about our crumbling marriage, but I wasn't ready for the final blow. That blow came the Friday before the last game. I was tired when I got home to find Stacy gone. There was a note on the table saying she had left for New York, but she was expecting a package that needed my signature. To me, this felt like more of the same disregard from her. I had thought about ending things months ago, but I still loved her. I was hopeful we could sort things out after the season. When the doorbell rang, I figured it was Stacy's package. I opened the door to an older man who asked if I was Jason Saunders. When I nodded, he handed me a package and said, "You've been served." Then he took a picture of me with his phone. Stacy had gone ahead with the divorce. As tough as that was, worse news came the next day. A player from the Giants called me and informed me that Jimmy Washington was claiming that Stacy was now his girlfriend and had moved in with him. Jimmy had done it to me again. I found out about Stacy and Jimmy on Saturday, and by Sunday, I was taken off the field due to what seemed like a serious injury. The team doctor looked at my knee and had me sent to the hospital. There they found that I had a torn ACL. They operated on my knee the next day and informed me that recovery could take anywhere from 2 to 9 months. I worried that no one would want a hurt backup quarterback, and my fears grew when the Eagles paid me the rest of my contract and released me. Even though I had led my team close to the Super Bowl the year before, I found myself out of a job. You might think that some team would see my past success and want to sign me, but that's not how things go in the NFL. There are many players with more skill than some already in the league, yet they never get a real chance. Coaches are just people, and they often make mistakes, especially when picking players. That's why many draft picks don't work out. I understood this, and it shouldn't have bothered me, but it did. There's only so much I could control, and right now, I had to focus on healing my knee. Even if I never played football again, I didn't want to walk with a limp. While I was going through rehab, I also had to think about my next steps. I hadn't forgotten about Jimmy, and somehow I wanted to settle that score. Stacy, too, would get what was coming to her. But at that moment, I couldn't think of anything I could do to make them feel the hurt they had caused me. A week after the season ended, I saw in the news that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers had let go of Coach Sullivan. He had winning seasons every year except this last one. With so many injuries, especially on the offensive line, the fact that they ended the season 7-10 showed his coaching skills. In 3 of those games, they lost by just 5 points total. One game ended with a controversial call by the referees. On a crucial play, Tampa was penalized for roughing the passer, but the replay showed the defensive player was pushed into the quarterback. That penalty gave Atlanta extra chances and led them to kick a field goal and win the game by 1 point. I felt for Coach Sullivan, but I had my own challenges ahead. Months of physical therapy awaited me, and I would start while still on crutches. Because of the agreement between the NFL and the players, the Eagles would cover my rehab costs. They wanted to set it up in Philadelphia, but I preferred to go back to my condo in Jacksonville. I had thought about selling it many times, but now I was glad I hadn't. It was a single-floor place, which made moving around easier for me. Once I was back in Jacksonville, the Eagles arranged for a trainer to work with me at home for the first couple of weeks. After that, they found a rehab center close to my condo. My first visit to the center was uplifting. I was feeling low because of my divorce and my injury, so I had kept to myself. But when I walked into the center, the staff and other patients greeted me warmly, and it really lifted my spirits. I was about 20 minutes late for my appointment because I was busy signing autographs. After 2 months, the doctor said I could go home with a list of exercises to do on my own. It was tough to work out by myself, but I knew I had to keep at it. By the 3rd month, the doctors let me start jogging, and by the 4th month, I was running fast. I had to admit that my leg felt pretty good. Still, the sadness of my divorce lingered. The loneliness often felt overwhelming at night. I kept practicing at the local high school and a gym I joined. When the high school football players found out, they started coming to watch me. Soon, I was working with them, teaching the quarterbacks how to throw faster and read defenses better. I enjoyed helping the receivers, teaching them to catch the ball with their hands and keep it away from their bodies. One day, a local television station showed up and did a story about how I was using my recovery time to train the football team. I watched the piece that night and thought it was nice. But I was surprised by 2 things that happened after it aired. The first surprise came the next day. While I was stretching, I looked up and saw Charlotte watching me with a shy smile. "Hi, Jason," Charlotte said, looking unsure. "It's nice to see you." I was surprised to see Charlotte, but just nodded. "What brings you here today?" "I wanted to see you. I wanted to ask for your forgiveness for not believing you." I thought for a moment and then shrugged. "Okay, I forgive you, but why do you believe me now?" Charlotte turned a bit red. "I hate to say it, but I didn't until my father hired someone to investigate. They spoke to the woman in the photo, and she admitted that Jimmy paid her to set you up." "That guy?" I exclaimed. "I'm not surprised he was involved, but it really bothers me. Anyway, that's in the past. I should get back to practice. It was good to see you, Charlotte. Please say hello to your dad for me." Charlotte looked sad and uncertain. "Jason, do you think we could grab coffee or lunch sometime and just talk?" "I don't think that's a good idea, Charlotte. You've probably heard about my upcoming divorce. To be honest, I'm in a difficult place when it comes to relationships. The 2 I cared about both left me, so I think I need to focus on myself for a while." I saw tears in Charlotte's eyes as she turned and walked away from the field. I felt a bit sorry for her, but I was still dealing with my own divorce. However, I noticed that Charlotte came to the field for the next 3 days, sitting in the stands to watch me. She didn't try to speak to me, but she watched everything I did. I was waiting for a call from my parents on Friday evening, but I was completely surprised when I saw Coach Sullivan's name on my phone. He asked if we could have lunch together the next day. I agreed right away, even though I wasn't sure why he wanted to meet. Still, I looked forward to our lunch. I had things to say about the people in Tampa. Once we ordered and made some small talk, Coach Sullivan asked me about my knee. "My knee is fine," I said. "I can do anything, even run fast. I ice it every evening, but there hasn't been any pain for a couple of months. My doctor last told me I was almost completely back to normal." The coach smiled. "I saw the article about you with the high school football players. I was impressed by that long throw you made to a kid. It's too bad he couldn't catch it." I laughed. It wasn't his fault. The guy covering him was all over him. "True." The coach smiled and then leaned back, studying me. "Jason, I want to tell you something, but keep it to yourself until tomorrow night." I nodded, and then he shared some big news. "Tomorrow, I will be named the head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars. When I start, I want you to join the training camp. I can't promise anything, but I've always believed you could be a strong NFL quarterback. I should be honest, Jacksonville is in a tough spot with their budget. I knew that NFL teams had to manage how much they spent on players. This coming season, teams could only spend $214 million on player salaries, and if they went over that, there were serious penalties. The Jaguars were just under $1 million under the budget, so they would need to change contracts, trade players, or let some go to stay in line. The reason I'm sharing this with you," the coach continued, "is that I don't want to lose you to another team." I don't think you need to worry, Coach. No one is rushing to sign me right now. They think I'm not so good anymore. The coach smiled. Well, if any teams show interest, I want you to know my offer before you decide anything else. I'll guarantee you $50,000 just to come to training camp. If you make the team, I'll guarantee you $800,000. If you stay with the team until the end of the season, you'll get another $700,000. Plus, I'll add bonuses based on your performance. I think you can count on me, Coach, I said with a big grin. Honestly, I doubt any other teams will come calling. I had almost accepted that my NFL career was over. But even if another team wants to make a deal, it has to be a lot better than what you're offering because I know I'll get a fair chance with you. We left with the first bit of good news I had in 3 months. A week later, things got more interesting. Coach Sullivan called me and said I would start practicing with 3 receivers still on the Jaguars team, Tuck Turner, Billy Swill, and Akeem Lucker. Since I could not use the Jaguars field, we decided to move our practices to a public park. I was surprised that Charlotte somehow found out where we were and kept showing up. After our first practice with the 3 receivers, I liked Tuck and Billy, but Akeem was a challenge. Tuck was nearly as fast as Jimmy, but his route running needed work. Billy wasn't very fast, but he was quick off the line and ran good routes. Akeem was faster than Jimmy, but had trouble running his routes. He often left you guessing where he would be. On the bright side, he had great catching skills. The downside was that he thought he was better than everyone else. He was quick to anger and loved to show off. Sometimes, when we practiced, I let some high school kids fill in, mostly at the safety and cornerback spots. I also let the high school defensive linemen come after me. The rule was they had to wait 3 seconds before rushing at me, and there was no hitting. But one day, Akeem really annoyed me. One high school safety managed to knock the ball out of Akeem's hands, which made him upset. I didn't know how mad Akeem was and how he would react on the next play. He ran hard at the kid, even though the ball wasn't thrown that way, and the kid fell hard. I quickly ran to check on him. Thankfully, he was just shaken up. But I was really angry, and I turned on Akeem. "What's wrong with you?" I shouted. "What?" He tried to act innocent. "We just got mixed up. You did that on purpose. Practice is over." I then took the young man home. When I got to his house, I explained what had happened to his mom and apologized. I told her to call me if her son needed to see a doctor because I would cover the cost. I never heard from her, so I guess he was all right. But I was still very upset with Akeem. That night, I called Coach Sullivan and told him what happened. I said I didn't want to practice with Akeem until training camp. Luckily, the coach said Akeem wouldn't be a part of our practices anymore. Within a week of taking over the Jaguars, Coach Sullivan made 2 surprising trades. He traded our Pro Bowl defensive tackle to Houston for the 11th pick in the draft and Akeem to the Raiders for the 3rd pick in the 2nd round. Many people in the sports world thought Coach Sullivan had made a big mistake by trading away the most important players on the team. Akeem had a great season, catching passes for over 1,000 yards and scoring 7 touchdowns. When the draft began, Coach Sullivan made a move to go from 7th to 5th place to pick Joe Connors, a quarterback from the University of Tennessee. To make this trade, Coach Sullivan gave up the 7th pick, a 3rd-round pick for that year, and a 2nd-round pick for the next year. Then, with the 11th pick, the Jaguars selected the top safety, Todd Stiles. With the 3rd pick in the 2nd round, he chose Hubbard "Hump" Jackson, who was the 3rd best offensive lineman available. Coach Sullivan showed again how talented he was at using the draft to build a strong team. He picked a middle linebacker, Willie Matthews, in the 5th round. Although he should have been picked earlier, he was still available because some worried about his past injuries. In the 6th round, the Jaguars picked a tall tight end, Matt Bradford, from a lesser-known college. I continued to train in the park and often saw Charlotte there. About a month before training camp, I signed the contract Coach Sullivan had promised me. It was then that I first saw Joe Connors play, and I was impressed. He had skill and was smart, but he also needed some improvement. We lost all 3 preseason games, but Joe showed some flashes of talent, and I played well, throwing a touchdown pass in each game and just 1 interception. When teams had to cut their rosters down to 53 players, I was still on the team. My contract for $700,000 was now secured. Just as I thought, Joe was named the starting quarterback. I didn't think it was the best choice, and I guessed the coach felt the same way. Still, management wanted it that way. Joe struggled, throwing 2 interceptions and getting sacked 4 times. We lost to Tennessee 17-0. At least our defense performed well. The following Monday, Coach Sullivan called me into his office and told me I would be starting the next game. He wanted me to help Joe improve his game. This was no problem for me. After learning how to be an NFL quarterback, I was always happy to help others who needed it. I led the team to 4 straight wins. But then we faced the New York Giants and their player, Jimmy Washington. I really wanted to win against the Giants. Sadly, I played poorly and threw 2 interceptions. Jimmy seemed to get into my head, and I hesitated to throw the ball toward his side. He caught one of my passes and returned it for a touchdown. We lost the game 27-17. The only positive I could take was that I managed to throw 1 touchdown pass, but a loss is still a loss. That Sunday morning, I decided to skip Stacy's show. Some players told me that she had really criticized me. She said on her show that the Giants were too good for Jacksonville, and that my performance as quarterback was the main issue. The next Sunday, I decided to watch Stacy's show. I still thought she was beautiful and missed her. Stacy praised Jimmy's play and pointed out how poorly I had done. This made me really angry. I knew I shouldn't let it bother me, but I couldn't help but send her a text that said, "Nice show. Too bad you don't know what you're talking about. Jimmy will show you." Stacy didn't find it funny. Her quick reply was just, "Forget you." I felt a little better after that. Winning against Philadelphia that week also helped. The week after, Stacy went on the attack again. She was nice on air, but critical of my performance. She made it funny, so most people laughed, except for the Jacksonville fans and players. We came out strong and beat the Baltimore Ravens 42-17. I threw for 367 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no interceptions. In the post-game interview, I took a jab at Stacy and said, "I guess Stacy doesn't understand football as well as she thinks." I don't know if Stacy thought that our dispute might hurt her career or if someone told her to stop, but she eventually stopped talking about me. We won the next game, too, but lost the following 3. Meanwhile, the Giants were doing really well after struggling for a long time. As the season went on, I started to reconnect with Charlotte. Before training camp, she had been coming to some of my practice sessions. I thought she would stop once we trained at the Jaguars' facilities. I didn't dislike Charlotte. I just felt sad when she turned me down, so I moved on when Stacy came into the picture. Sometimes I remembered the good times I had with Charlotte. The Monday morning after our second preseason game, I arrived early at the Jaguars' facilities for strength training. I've always believed that staying fit helps players avoid injuries. To my surprise, I found Charlotte running on a treadmill. She turned and smiled when I walked into the gym. I stared at her for a moment, wondering how she got past security. Not knowing what to think, I asked, "How did you get in here?" "The security guard let me in," she replied calmly. "I don't understand. The public can't come into the stadium facilities." "They allowed some major sponsors to have access," Charlotte explained. "I convinced my dad to buy the naming rights for the stadium." "The stadium will change its name to First Century Stadium when the current contract ends. Because of this, I can use the gym here as long as it doesn't interfere with the team's schedule." I shrugged and went to do my weight training. About an hour later, Charlotte came over to me while I was at the machine. "I wanted to let you know that I'll be working out in the mornings 3 or 4 times a week in case you want to avoid me," she said. I frowned. "We may not be together anymore, but I'm not angry with you. I was just disappointed and hurt that you didn't trust me." "I get it," she replied sadly. "I don't blame you for feeling that way. I acted a bit foolish. Maybe with time we can be friends again." "Sure, we can try that," I said carefully. "For now, let's just keep things easy." Charlotte sighed and agreed. So a new routine began. At first, we acknowledged each other and then went to our own workouts. Next, we chatted a little during our water breaks. Eventually, we worked out close to each other and talked more. By the 7th game, we occasionally had lunch together. I enjoyed spending time with Charlotte, which helped me cope with the pain of losing Stacy. But I still remembered the hurt of being left without a word. I didn't want that to happen again. As the regular season came to a close, Charlotte and I grew closer as friends. She told me about her job at the bank, which now operated in 26 states and planned to expand to all states except Alaska and Hawaii within 5 years. She also asked if I would consider returning to work at the bank, noting that she was willing to relocate to New York City if needed. I didn't promise anything but said I would think about it. Even though I told myself I didn't want to get back together with Charlotte, we were becoming closer again. Then I received surprising news from Stacy after our divorce. She told me that she and Jimmy Washington were engaged and planned to marry after the Super Bowl. I found out while having dinner with Charlotte. She was talking when my phone started buzzing. I looked at it and saw the announcement about the engagement. My face went pale and I felt a wave of panic. I quickly stood up, reached into my pocket, and threw some money on the table. "I'm sorry," I said to Charlotte, struggling to speak. "I need to go." Worried, Charlotte jumped up and followed me. I made it to a park across the street when she caught up with me. "What's wrong, Jason?" she asked with concern. I showed her the news on my phone, and tears began to fall. Charlotte looked at the screen and then hugged me gently. "I'm really sorry, Jason. You don't deserve this." I held on to her tightly, feeling like she was my only support. I cried on her shoulder for a little while. When I pulled away, I apologized for my tears. "You don't need to say sorry," she said gently. "Some people just don't understand each other. Come on, let's get a drink. Just one, though, since you have practice tomorrow." As we shared our drinks, Charlotte was very kind. We talked about how Jimmy had caused difficulty in my love life. Charlotte was especially upset about what he did that ended our relationship. "I don't know why this hurts so much," I finally confessed. "Jimmy and Stacy have been together since she moved to New York. It still hurts, and I know I'll face some teasing from the guys in the locker room tomorrow." After more conversation, Charlotte helped me feel better. She also shared some tips on how to handle the teasing I knew was coming. 3 younger players were always poking fun at someone. Today, it was my turn. Sammy Botts started it, saying, "Hey, Jason, how does it feel to be the one left behind?" "Well, Sammy," I replied, grinning slightly, "I wouldn't expect you to know this since you struggle with the playbook, but I'm no longer married to Stacy, so technically, I can't be left behind." This made the nearby players laugh, but the teasing didn't stop. Sid Locker, who thought of himself as charming, chimed in, "Jimmy must be having a good time with your ex-wife." "Well, you might get the same chance," I said. "All you need is a huge contract and some charm. You have the charm, but you only make about $700,000. That won't work, my friend. Unless you have some hidden skills, I don't see you getting anywhere near a big contract. Besides, Stacy prefers different types, but I appreciate my teammates. They keep me strong." Then I turned to Billy Ray Johnson. "And don't start with me, Billy Ray. You don't make nearly enough, and I don't think Stacy would be interested at all." The locker room filled with laughter. After that, the teasing slowed down when my would-be bullies saw that I wasn't bothered and could dish it back. Slowly, I began to forget about Stacy. It definitely helped that Charlotte and I were getting closer again. We were dating once more, and it felt wonderful, like the good old days. Reflecting on both women made me realize I had chosen the wrong partner. I should have listened to Carl and waited for Charlotte to settle down. I just felt so hurt by what had happened. The regular season came to an end, and we made it into the playoffs as a wild card team. Coach Sullivan was amazing, and the city of Jacksonville was thrilled. They hadn't been to a playoff game in 10 years. In his first year as the head coach of the Jaguars, Coach Sullivan turned the team around completely. Our first game was on a Saturday against the Tennessee Titans. It was exciting and went down to the last second. The Titans were in the lead the whole time until I led the team down the field to the Titans' 29-yard line with just 3 seconds left. Then our kicker, Charlie Sabo, scored, giving us a 16-14 victory. After the game, I was on top of the world. I imagined everyone in Jacksonville felt the same. At the beginning of the season, I thought I would be backing up Joe Connors, their first-round draft pick. But instead, I started and never got replaced by Joe. We even made it into the wild card playoff game and won. In that moment, my worries seemed small. I had arranged to have dinner with Charlotte, win or lose after the game, and we enjoyed the celebration together. After dinner, I invited her to my place for a drink. I didn't expect much. I just wanted to keep the good feelings going. But as soon as I closed the door, Charlotte showed a warm affection that felt familiar. We found ourselves in the bedroom, where we shared gentle moments together. Still, I worried we were moving too quickly, so we decided to take things slow. The next week, I didn't see much of Charlotte, but we talked every morning. I was busy getting ready to play against Pittsburgh that Sunday, and nobody thought we had a chance. But our defense played great, and our running game was strong. After beating the Steelers 28-14, we boarded the plane feeling happy. Next, we were headed to the NFC Championship game against the Cleveland Browns. On paper, the Browns looked like a much better team. To add to the challenge, it was supposed to be really cold in Cleveland. Again, everyone believed we wouldn't win, but our team focused and played hard despite the cold. The field was frozen and the wind was strong. Passing the ball was tough, so we leaned on our running game and solid defense. In the end, we surprised everyone by winning 13-10. Now we were headed to the Super Bowl, and the city of Jacksonville was buzzing with excitement. While we were making our way through the playoffs, the Giants had an easier time. They beat New Orleans 38-20 and then took down Green Bay 37-14. However, I was glad that their quarterback, Jimmy, hadn't played as well recently. He hadn't let up a touchdown all season, but he gave up 2 in the playoffs. I was nervous about the 2 weeks between the AFC-NFC championship games and the Super Bowl. During this time, the players would have to deal with a lot of hype and attention from the media. I talked to the team before everything got hectic. I reminded them to enjoy the celebrations, but to stay focused on our real goal, winning the Super Bowl. I emphasized that many players never get the chance to play in a Super Bowl, and it would be a shame to lose because we weren't ready. During the 2 weeks leading up to the Super Bowl, I found out that Stacy would be a sideline commentator for CBS. This news upset me. I informed the Jaguars PR team that I wouldn't speak to my ex-wife. They told me I had to give interviews, but I insisted I would speak to anyone else except Stacy. They warned me that I could face fines for this. I said I would pay any fine, but I wouldn't change my mind. I finished by saying that forcing me to talk to Stacy would create a difficult situation at work. Then, I shared a story with the media that Stacy had been unfaithful during our marriage with a player from another team. After that, the NFL agreed to let other reporters interview me. I knew this would frustrate Stacy since it hurt her reputation and changed how people viewed her. During those 2 weeks, Jimmy kept bragging that he had the upper hand over me. Unfortunately, he had outplayed me the one time we faced the Giants. It felt like he could anticipate my moves, so I was determined to ensure it didn't happen again. I spent countless hours watching recordings of our games, particularly against the Giants. I wanted to see if I was giving any signs that Jimmy could pick up on. At first, neither I nor the coaches saw anything unusual, but one night, after studying the game footage, I realized something. There was a small difference in how I played against the Giants compared to other teams. After looking closely at every play, I discovered that the issue arose not before the play, but when we broke the huddle. When we called a passing play, I would glance over at Jimmy, but for a running play, I didn't. This felt minor, but as I kept watching, I became convinced it was a key to what Jimmy was doing. I showed my findings to the coaches, and they agreed. We decided to create a game plan that would address this. Although Jimmy was still faster than most receivers, we had someone nearly as quick. I also noticed that if we filled the side opposite Jimmy with receivers, he would move quickly to cover the middle. When Jimmy thought we would run the ball, he would push forward to fill a gap. If my theory about what Jimmy was doing was correct, we should be able to take advantage of that. One thing I promised myself was that Jimmy would not control this game. It's hard to describe the feelings you have just before the Super Bowl. For me, I wanted to make Coach Sullivan proud of me. As I waited for the game to start, I kept reminding myself to take it one play at a time. If one play didn't work, I'd forget it and focus on making the next one better. About 20 minutes before the game, the door opened and the owners came in. I was surprised to see my old boss, Carl Domino, with them. "Jason, it's great to see you again," he said, shaking my hand. "I wanted to tell you how happy I am that you and Charlotte are friends again. Now go out there and do your best against the Giants." "We're definitely going to try our hardest," I replied with a smile. "We might have a few tricks up our sleeve." The Giants were expected to win because they had one of the best defenses in the NFL that year, and their offense was strong too. While our defense had done well in the playoff games so far, no one believed they could stop the Giants' offense. But any thoughts of a slow game went away quickly in the first quarter. The Giants took the ball first and easily moved down the field to score. When we got our turn, we followed our plan, avoiding Jimmy's area. When we reached the Giants' 32-yard line, our drive slowed down. It was 3rd down and 2 yards to go for a first down. I glanced at Jimmy and saw him smirking. I could tell he was already planning to tell everyone he won the Super Bowl because I was hesitant to play toward him. It was time to turn the tables on Jimmy. When we broke the huddle, I didn't look at him. He started creeping toward the line. I faked the handoff and he fell for it. Our tight end, Matt Bradford, pretended to block but then broke free. I threw the ball to Matt and he ran into the end zone for a touchdown. Then we exchanged field goals. But with 5 minutes left in the half, New York moved quickly, making 3 great passes and scoring to put them ahead 17-10. However, I had a little over 2 minutes left, so I started moving down the field and mixed up my plays to throw Jimmy off. I completed the drive with a 17-yard pass to Billy Swill, who got ahead of Jimmy just enough. The half ended in a tie, 17-17. The second half started like the first. We had the ball first, running it 8 times with just 1 screen pass. Ray Thompson, our fullback, powered in from the 3-yard line for a touchdown, but the Giants responded with a touchdown of their own. Then we exchanged punts for the first time in the game. Next, we got the ball back at our 29-yard line with a 3rd down and 5 yards to go. The coaches called for a screen pass to the opposite side from Jimmy, but New York saw the play coming, so I glanced over to Jimmy's side. He had moved toward the center, and by the time he adjusted, Billy Swill was already ahead of him. I dropped the pass right over Jimmy, and Billy sprinted to the end zone. Jimmy had told everyone he was better than me, but I had scored 3 touchdowns against him. Still, I wasn't thinking about that. I was completely focused on winning this game. New York came back and scored a touchdown plus a field goal, making the score 34-31 in their favor at the end of the third quarter. The fourth quarter turned into a test of defense, but the Giants added another field goal to take a 37-31 lead. We got the ball back on our own 21-yard line with less than 4 minutes remaining. We executed 3 running plays and gained 12 yards for a first down. I smiled when I saw the coach's plan. He had put more receivers on Jimmy's side. I could tell that Jimmy wanted to make a significant play since he wasn't doing well so far, so I called a play with Jay Wilder and Brad next to Billy, who was behind them. All 3 sprinted down the field with 2 safeties and Jimmy following them. A linebacker moved into their area, too. Then, Brad made a sharp turn toward the sideline, while Jay headed to the center of the field. Billy took a couple of steps, acting like he would go to the sideline, but when Jimmy noticed I was watching Brad, he moved in that direction. That gave Billy the opportunity he needed, and he sprinted past Jimmy. Realizing his mistake, Jimmy tried to change direction but slipped and fell. I threw the ball to Billy, and he ran 67 yards into the end zone. Now we led 38-37 with 2 minutes and 37 seconds left. After the kickoff, the Giants quickly moved down the field. With 3 fast passes, they reached our 21-yard line. But then they ran 2 plays that lost them 3 yards. It was now 3rd down and 13, and they attempted a crossing pattern. But our cornerback Jack Willard intercepted it. Unfortunately, he was tackled at our 1-yard line. Coach Sullivan called 2 running plays, but we didn't gain any yards. New York had used 2 of their 3 timeouts, so we hadn't wasted much time. If we didn't gain a first down on the next play, we would have to punt from deep in our end zone. This would give the Giants a chance to block the kick or at least get good field position. They would also have time to try and score. Everyone knew we had to pass, so we lined up in a shotgun formation. My offensive line protected me well while I looked over the field 3 times. But every time I glanced around, our receivers were all tightly covered by the defense. Finally, I noticed an opening on the left side and took off down the field. After I had run about 5 yards, Jimmy saw me and tried to block my way. We collided about 8 yards from where the play started. I focused my determination towards Jimmy, lowered my shoulder, and pushed into him. I managed to move him back a bit, but I wasn't sure how much. I rolled off Jimmy and stood up as the referees hurried to check the chains for a first down. "You didn't make it, you know," Jimmy said, sitting on the ground and rubbing his knee. "I think we did," I replied with a grin. "But whether we made it or not, Jimmy, I certainly left an impression. If your team loses, people will remember that. Forget you, he grumbled as he got to his feet and limped away. A moment later, cheers and groans filled the stadium. We had made the first down by just an inch. With 4 more plays and less than a minute left, all I needed to do was take the snap and kneel down 3 times. The Giants used their last timeout after the first snap, but they couldn't stop the clock anymore. Once I kneeled for the 3rd time, the game was over. We had beaten the Giants and were now the Super Bowl champions. I had won a Super Bowl before, but this one felt different. Epilogue. All those years I wanted to get back at Jimmy, and now I had finally done it. I had left him in a challenging position in front of everyone. He had let 3 touchdowns happen, and I had tackled him to secure our victory. I was named the MVP of the Super Bowl, and the New York media criticized Jimmy heavily. They blamed him for the Giants' loss. The trouble I stirred up about Stacy affected her career too. She was no longer seen as the sweet person everyone liked. I spotted her glaring at me from the sidelines while another reporter tried to get through the crowd. Then I saw Charlotte and her father with the owners of the Jaguar team heading to the middle of the field for the ceremony to present the Lombardi Trophy. Looking at Charlotte's bright smile, I realized what I wanted. I wanted to spend my life with her. So, before everyone there, I shared a heartfelt moment with her and asked her to marry me. The surprised look on her face turned into a huge smile. With tears of joy rolling down her cheeks, she nodded. The crowd around us cheered and clapped. Holding her close, I turned to the CBS reporter who had finally caught up to us. That whole moment was shown again and again on TV. The city of Jacksonville erupted with joy. Unlike other places where celebrations turned chaotic, there were no riots, just thousands of happy people. It was said that 400,000 fans showed up for a parade through the city. Of course, requests for endorsements came in for Charlotte and me. Charlotte and I got married on the 2nd Saturday in March, the day before Stacy and Jimmy's wedding. It wasn't planned that way. Anyone who knows about weddings knows that finding a venue on such short notice is tough. You take what you can get. Still, Stacy sent me an angry text, claiming I was trying to steal her spotlight. I showed it to Charlotte, and we had a good laugh before deleting it without replying. A couple of weeks after the Super Bowl, I announced my retirement. I could have played for another year or 2, but I wanted to go out strong. Plus, Carl had persuaded me to come back to First Century to help him expand the bank. Coach Sullivan also convinced Carl to let me spend a couple of weeks working with the quarterbacks during training camp. Those 2 weeks served 2 purposes. I got to enjoy football again, and watching those guys practice hard in the hot Florida sun helped me stick to my decision to retire. Stacy and Jimmy's marriage lasted less than 2 years because Jimmy found someone younger. I heard this hit Stacy hard. She usually ended relationships, so it was new for her to be the one left behind. Stacy's show went on for another 5 years, and I have to admit I liked watching it with Charlotte. But the ratings slowly dropped, and eventually the show was canceled. Like football, TV is a business. If you're not making money, you're out. The last I heard, Stacy was working as a weather reporter in Toledo, Ohio. About 3 years after the Super Bowl, I ran into Stacy's mom, Linda. I always liked her, so I stopped to have coffee. She told me Stacy was having a tough time dealing with the breakup with Jimmy. Linda then patted my hand and said she missed having me as part of the family. I also learned something else about Stacy from a college friend of hers. That time she stepped back from school, claiming she had mono. Stacy didn't have mono. She withdrew due to a personal matter. Apparently there were complications that required medical attention. I'm not sure if it's true, but her friend said that because of the complications, Stacy can no longer have children. Jimmy's injury in the Super Bowl was just a strained ligament. He only played for another 6 months in New York before being traded to Detroit for a 7th-round pick. I think both Jimmy and the club were pleased with the change. He faced a lot of boos every time he played in New York. He finished the season in Detroit and played 1 more year before being let go. The last I heard, Jimmy had filed for bankruptcy and was selling real estate in California. I called Tabor from time to time, but TJ was still battling cancer. About 4 years later, I received a call from Tabor that brought me great sadness. The doctors had told him that TJ only had a few months to live. I quickly bought plane tickets for Gina, Tabor, and TJ to come to town. The owner of the team kindly invited TJ and his family to watch the game from a special box. I took TJ and Tabor to the locker room where the players were very kind. TJ passed away 3 weeks after the game. I flew out for the funeral, and it was one of the saddest moments of my life. I couldn't help but shed tears when I saw the little boy in the coffin wearing the jersey I had given him in the hospital. The loss of TJ deeply affected Gina and Tabor, but they found strength in each other. Their love helped them heal, and they welcomed 3 more daughters into their family. Each year, around Halloween, Charlotte and I would invite Tabor and his family to visit us in Jacksonville for a week. One of our traditions was to attend a Jacksonville Jaguars game together. Our families would wear Jaguar jerseys with TJ and the number 9 on the back. 9 was TJ's favorite number, which also happened to be my number when I played for the Jaguars. Life has a way of moving forward. One night, while Charlotte and I were close on the couch, she shared a new way of looking at my past relationships. "You really should thank Jimmy," my wife said, resting her head on my shoulder. "Why would I want to thank someone like him?" I replied with a laugh. "Think about it," she said, lifting her head to meet my gaze. "Your breakup with Gina was hard, but you were young. You can't deny that Gina and Tabor belong together. Jimmy didn't bring them together. They liked each other already." I wasn't ready to agree. "Maybe that's true, but what about everything else? You said yourself that you were better off without Melinda. Isn't she on her 3rd or 4th husband now? Jimmy might have introduced her to someone, but she made her own choices. And with Stacy, you loved an idea, not the real person. Jimmy made you see that." "What about us?" I pressed Charlotte. "Jimmy came between us and I almost lost you. That makes him a bad person." "But that breakup helped me grow," Charlotte answered softly. "In what way?" I asked. "If we had married back then, I was insecure. You would have grown tired of me." Being apart gave me time to see a counselor, and I learned about myself. I realized I was selfish, insecure, and overly jealous of any woman around you. Thanks to Jimmy, I became a better version of myself. With that in mind, I should write Jimmy a thank you note, I thought, resting my head against Charlotte's shoulder. I did send Jimmy a thank you note. It was actually a postcard of the Super Bowl champion Jacksonville Jaguars. I wrote, "Thank you for everything you've done for me." Sure, I was being a bit cheeky, but I enjoyed it. As for me, life is good. I work as the executive vice president at Century First. After 8 years of marriage, Charlotte and I have a little boy named Jason Jr. and a little girl named Cassie. Sometimes, when I look back, it's amusing to think that I didn't want to play football, yet my journey has been quite fulfilling. Hey, audience. If you liked this video and want to keep up with more thrilling stories, make sure to subscribe to Prince Cheating Tales and hit the notification bell. You don't want to miss out on our upcoming adventures. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next wonderful story.